Great. I see from the screen we have about 34 people logged in at the moment, so welcome everybody. I'm going to assume folks are sort of familiar with the Zoom format by now, so I invite everybody to use the chat function if you'd like throughout the meeting. As I said earlier during the business meeting, this is our 79th year as Soil and Water Society in New York. It's interesting to read the history, which you can on our website. I would encourage everybody to visit. Don't be too judgmental. It's under construction. It's a little outdated, but we're working on it. The history section is very interesting, though. I also want to thank our new council members that we just nominated in the business meeting previous to this. Thank you, everybody, for stepping up. Christos, especially out of the blue, joining the group. Thank you so much. Not on the agenda today is a speaker that I would like to introduce as a little bit of a surprise. As people may know that there's a society in every state, and therefore there is a national level that finds its home in Iowa. We have with us today Claire Lindahl, who is the CEO of the Soil and Water Society in Ankeny, Iowa, the Chief Executive Officer for the national office. And I invited her today to say some words to the group, and she graciously agreed. So Claire, I want to turn it over to you to say whatever words of wisdom you have to the folks here in New York. And thank you very much for joining us.
Yep. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because it just said my mic was not working, which is the first time that's ever happened. And like, of course, right? Well, I am Claire Lindahl. I'm the CEO of the Soil and Water Conservation Society. I will try to spout out some words of wisdom. It is 8 a.m. here, though. I will just like preface with that. But I know we're all early birds as conservationists. So thank you for having me. I will say I have been the CEO for the last 8 years of the 81 years of this organization. But I have been a member of the Soil and Water Conservation Society for twice as long, and I served as a chapter leader for a decade, and I'm really starting to age myself. I love how big those numbers are getting. I feel like they're giving me some cred, but I feel like they're also kind of aging me, and I'm not loving that. But good morning, New York. I've always wanted to say that, right? That's like what you see in all the Hallmark movies where the main lead is like a broadcaster of some sort. But I just wanted to start out, if those of you who are not familiar with the society, to tell you just a little bit about us and kind of incorporate some of the current things that we have going on within what we do. So we rose out of the Dust Bowl to support conservation professionals, all of you on this call, across sectors, across disciplines, across geographies. We aim to support you. We aim to be your voice. And so we do that in several different ways. We do that through information and education, through awareness, through training, through different events, through awards programs, and through research, through science, and through advocacy. And we are actually, as you all know, in your offices and in the spaces that you work, we are science and we are practice. And that is an incredible blend that's important to the work we do. And try picking a keynote speaker for you all. Half of you all love it, and half of you all hate it every year. I try to go back and forth with the science and the practice. You're a great group to represent. I used to work in the field, and I feel so honored to be in this position. And I can't express to you how important it is for you to become a member of SWCS, not because that's my job as the CEO of a membership organization, but also because we need your voice. We want to represent you. We want to make sure that you are part of this collective. So just a few updates as we go into this new year. And one is that we just dropped our call for presentations for our annual conference. So we will be hosting our annual conference this year, July 26th through July 29th in St. Louis, Missouri. So please attend, plan on presenting, bring all of your greatest, latest research and practice and projects. We would love to hear from you, and we would love to have you in attendance. The Cubs are playing the Cardinals right before, so just going to drop that there. And we are at the Ballpark Hotel downtown, so should be a good experience. Another thing that conference is kind of our capstone. It's a lovely event. You feel like you're with family. It's just got a good vibe. You will really enjoy coming. We have an emerging leader program, and 100% of the emerging leaders who came last year would recommend it to their colleagues to come. So it's a bit of a banger. I highly recommend attending if you can. Another thing that we just dropped that I'm very excited about is our soil health and conservation special edition of our journal. So that is live, and we have some really cool graphics on LinkedIn. Our staff have been really creating these incredible visuals that have made the science hop right off the page. So please get in, check that out, like it. You get a free access to our journal as a member, and you also get free access to an additional journal, the Natural Resource Conservation Service Journal. We have a call for some special issues related to conservation management of legacy sediment and nutrients in agricultural watersheds. So that's kind of our next special issue we're looking at. And so if you know someone doing research, or if you're doing projects in that space, please throw us a paper. We would love to see it. Throw us a data set. And we also have an A section of our journal, which is non-peer reviewed. I like to say that's the part that I understand really well. And we welcome projects, perspectives, things like that in that space. Another thing that we do that's very important is being your voice. So we support you through these trainings. We just finished a webinar series this year. But another thing that we think is very important is making sure that the voice of you who are working on the ground is elevated. It's elevated in all spaces. We want to elevate the profession in colleges so more people go into it. We want to elevate it with take your voice to the desks of leadership. And so we do have our awards program this year. I know, awards, but I can't think of a better year to acknowledge a colleague of yours who is doing really good work. This is really a year to express the gratitude to all of the folks that are doing this incredibly important work. And another thing I want to flag is that in our next newsletter, we will have a policy survey. And so it'll be a survey asking our members what role you want us to be taking in policy and advocacy. And I need you to direct us in that space so that my board can direct me on how active we want to be in that space. So I think there are some important opportunities for us to take the voice of the professional up, to lead initiatives, and to really advocate for the profession. And like I said, at multiple different levels. I could talk to you for hours about all of the things we're doing. I love what I do. I love that I get to support all the important work you do. Conservation work is tough. It is a challenge. It is some of the hardest work I've ever seen. And that's why I love working for all of you, because you're out there, you're hustling, you're doing it, and you do it today, and you've always done it against all odds. And so I just encourage you to be part of the Soil and Water Conservation Society. We have a really great emerging leader program, and it's a great way for you to send all of those staff that are in their first 5 years that you're trying to help figure out what to do. You just send them our way, and we get them all trained up for you. And so we open those applications up in August. We're in our 3rd year, and that has been an incredible way to get younger people into the professional societies. And we are helping transform them, and they are helping transform our society as well and modernizing it, because as you could tell from my lead-in, I'm just not as young as I used to be. I don't know what the kids are doing. So they're telling us what to do so that we can attract that next generation. I commend you for what you do. The chapter is a labor of love. I know it. I've done it for 10 years. I'm hosting the Iowa chapter here and helping them tomorrow. And I know that these leadership positions, they take time and they take effort, but I know how important they are. one of the main things of all the wonderful things I think we offer with the advocacy and the policy and the research and the science and the technical resources and the leadership program, what we hear time and time again is how important it is to have a community with SWCS. It's so funny that this non-quantifiable thing that I can't take to funders continues to be the most valuable thing that people find being part of this membership. And it was something that has definitely elevated my career. I would not be here. It has also inspired me personally. And so I just can't emphasize enough how important it is for your own well-being and your own professional career to be part of the Soil and Water Conservation Society. So if you are part of it, if you are a member, thank you. Figure out something and put it on your New Year's resolutions list to engage a little bit more in the coming year. I promise it will pay off tenfold. It always has for me. If you are not a member, please join us. We really want to hear your voice. We want to make sure that you have access to all of these ways to tell me what to tell everybody else. And this is going to be my last plug. It's a kind of random one, but I've watched this documentary on Netflix called Join or Die, and it is on Netflix for a few more months, but it talks about, it's this sociologist who really coined the term social capital. And that is what we all do through the society and also through the work that we do locally. We are building social capital, and it is incredibly intensive. It is not easy to measure, but it is so important. And that Join or Die documentary that just hit Netflix, it's on for a few more months, I found incredibly inspiring as we keep up this sort of labor of love in our conservation work lives. So that is my last kind of plug. I would just say, check us out, follow us on social media. Make sure you look at our website. We have a new member database where we've put a bunch of new resources for chapters and for members. And as always, I have an open door policy. Please email me anytime. There's this little weird policy thing on a field office that prevents us from getting wetlands on the ground. I want to know about it. I'm here for you. I'm here to take your voice to leadership, and I'm here to provide you with more resources to make your job easier and to make your life better. So those are my New Year's resolutions, and I just really am grateful for a little bit of time on the call today.
Thank you, Claire. That was wonderful. And thank you for making the effort to get there early.
No
I
problem.
realize you're in a different time zone. Plug for the society. Not only do they do all the awesome things that Claire just mentioned in terms of mission, but they got some great swag. If you like T-shirts and things of that nature, the website is the place to go. I also am a fan of your conservationist survey that you did, I think, in the Midwest a couple of years ago. Awesome report. Really gives a lot of insight into what people in the field think about the programs that they're trying to implement. So I would only add that a lot of the things that Claire mentioned that they do is really the mission of the Empire chapter as well, but here in New York. So I wanted to try to make that connection. Trainings, as you mentioned, are front and center these days here in New York as we see more and more young people coming into our profession and the seasoned veterans retiring. We have a fairly strong effort going on here in that regard with capacity and retention, and also our topic for today. So let me just introduce our topic for today a little bit before we jump to our first presenter. Those in the field and our membership, I think, like yours, represents a swath of people. It's not just district folks. There's a lot of NRCS folks on the line. We have private sector, like Chad, and engineers, private planners, academics, the whole group, which is what makes the society really valuable. And in our circles overlap quite a bit, obviously. And one conversation that we seem to have a lot of is engineering. Conservation is like a long train of events, starting with the assessment and the recognition of a resource concern, all the way through the implementation of a solution and the follow-up that comes after. A key link in that, or car in that train, I guess, to carry the metaphor, is engineering. So many of the practices that we do require an engineer's design and a sign off, especially the larger, more complicated ones, which seems to be where our programs are trending these days. And I think what we could all say as an observation is that gaining those services is more and more of a challenge as time goes by. There's people out there, dedicated people that work their butts off. There's no doubt about that, and we're grateful for them. But as people know, our programs have increased over the years. There's more and more money, at least from the state perspective, for conservation, resulting in more and more projects, more and more contracts, more and more need for design by engineers, construction oversight, and sign off. And that increase in workload is meeting a bottleneck because we're not necessarily seeing the number of engineers or existing engineers come into this field. And I think it's fair to say that it's holding things up. If we had greater access to engineers, we'd be able to get designs and projects done quicker. And I think it would just be good, I don't know, grease for the gears, if you will. So in our we're trying to address this issue by offering presentations by three folks at different stages of their career, which is really exciting. First, we're going to have Chris Travis, our next speaker. I'll just go through a brief bio for Chris. Is a engineering training at the Onondaga County Soil and Water Conservation District and a conservation tech. Chris provides technical assistance for farms, DOTs, municipalities, landowners on a whole wide range of things. I was introduced to Chris at the recent NACD meeting that was held in the Northeast here, where he gave a presentation on a stream bank stabilization project. Super impressed with Chris's presentation of the material. I think we're all going to be enjoy this talk coming up. But interesting to hear about the engineering situation from somebody who's sort of in the process of becoming an engineer. Following Chris will be Tim Clark, who, as many know, is the state engineer for the Department of Ag and Markets, works with the state committee, is knee deep in training and for technicians in the field and certifying folks and all sorts of things relative to engineering. He's going to be following Chris's talk about the top three BMPs with a talk about hydrology. But Tim's involvement in conversations about the engineering, I'll call it a shortage, really does give him a good perspective. And I know he's been working on this for a long time, so be able to speak to it. And then finally, rounding out the morning is going to be Pete Wright, who I owe my involvement in the society to. Years ago, Pete nominated me to the council at a meeting I was not attending, which is so often the case. But I've loved it, and I've been a part of the group ever since. But Pete was the state engineer for NRCS for a long time, then went on to work at Cornell, who's another great partner, and I hope we have a lot of representation. And Pete's going to take this topic on head on and really give his perspective and long experience about the things that go into becoming an engineer in this field and some context. So, you know, I'm going to be keeping an eye on the clock, and hopefully we can move things along. I see we're a little bit behind schedule, but I think it's worthwhile to fill in between the cracks, if you will, this sort of information. But at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Chris as our first presenter from Onondaga County Soil and Water Conservation District. Chris, thank you so much taking on the task at such short notice and making yourself available. At this point, I'll just turn it over to you. I think Sean or Amy will give you control of the presentation, and you can begin whenever you like. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Scott. I would also like to thank you for the opportunity and inviting me, as well as the Soil and Water Conservation Society for this opportunity. And with no further ado, I'll just go ahead and get this started. Okay, excellent. There it is. Okay, now everybody can see everything all right? We're good? All right, fantastic. So obviously, I wrote the big three. Clearly, this is Onondaga County specific. I am in no way asserting that these are the big three statewide. However, in Onondaga County, these three BMPs are implemented at a very high rate. Hence, I thought, and they're all engineered practices, so I thought it might be functional. Also, in that I am at the beginning of the arc of this career path. These are something that I had to learn relatively quickly when the rubber meets the road. And so I'll go ahead and get started. So Onondaga County obviously means people of the hills in Onondaga. So that is a very apt description for our county. This leads to significant amount of rill and gully erosion that we see on many of our farms. Hence, those BMPs that we have employed are those structural BMPs that are the wascob and the diversion. Frequently, these are cheap, easy, and relatively uh, effective to implement, which is why I think they're chosen so highly. Now, I meant to go back to this stage, this one. So the thing with the WASCOBs, I'd like to mention, we have all these names, right? We've got the WASCOB, the Water and Sediment Control Basin, but frequently in our field, we have all of these names that we toss around: sediment basin, attenuation basin, stormwater management basin, and you could always throw pond at the end of these, and they're almost interchangeable frequently. However, in our field, we know that while we interchange the names quite frequently, we know that there are different design characteristics of each of these management practices, right? So, for example, the sediment basin in the New York State Blue Book is a design that's meant to manage 50 acres, right? Whereas our WASCOBs, our water and sediment control basins, their upper drainage area is 5 acres or something of that nature. So I know that there's a lot of experienced conservationists on the call here, and so I just felt it was relevant to mention that I know a lot of us toss these terms around interchangeably, but of course we're all aware that there is a significant difference. Frequently, it can also be things like outletting, right? Some of these are meant to have infiltration, whereas other ones like the Wascob, you've got to have an outlet, and that's part of the design. But backing up, let me go continue to talk about Onondaga County's. So we've got the diversion and the WASCOBs, which are, like I said, cheap and easy and highly effective to implement. The third of the big three that I've done most frequently is the stream crossing. And this is due, of course, also to our topography and hydrology, in that we have many first and second order streams coming down off the hillsides, coming down into the flatland. Frequently, that's the farmed area. And so those three I've had to implement in my first 6 years over and over and over again. So I felt that this would be relevant. So they're also the reason why I threw them all together. Now, again, there's so many of you on here that are experienced conservationists. I don't need to get into this too much. Also, this is more of a con skills / symposium class, but the process for designing all of these BMPs is very similar, if not downright identical, in that we're starting with our design, as Scott said, we're starting with a resource concern, and we have to go out and we determine our design point, where we want to focus this BMP and site this BMP. Then we go ahead and I think we all probably use the precipitation estimates from Cornell's Extreme Precip website, which gives you values from 1 to the 500-year precipitation event. Then, of course, we know this process, right? We're delineating our sub-drainage area to our design point and determining what kind of cubic feet per second, how much water will be hitting that design point, which will then determine the characteristics and the parameters of said BMP, right? I did in here put um, EFH2 and StreamStats. So frequently, one of the programs we will use to streamline, expedite this process, right? Technology, is StreamStats. And StreamStats is great. It generates a nice sub-drainage area that you can then export into, it's a shape file, which you can then export into Google Earth or GIS or some of your other programs. I do want to flag here, though, as somebody who uses EFH2, which is an NRCS program, engineering field hydrology, I believe. I feel that that generates a better discharge. It's frequently higher than what the stream stats does, but that's because you're required to input the hydrologic soil group as well as the land use area, the land use, and as well as the acres, right? So you've got the A, B, C soils, and you've got that curve number, and I feel that it generates a better realistic discharge. Now, granted, I've never gone out in the field and compared the estimate versus the reality, which is probably something I should do one day, but that's neither here nor there. So once we've got these discharges, right, we also need to figure out how we're going to size, right, how we're going to site, and what we need to, and how exactly the cut fill quantities, et cetera, right, which is going to determine a lot of our expense. So the other program I use sometimes is EFT, another NRCS program, Engineering Field Tools, and they have a diversion, and you can import your EDM and help with the design parameters. They also have a waterway design wizard that is pretty straightforward and not too terribly complicated. But since we're going through this, I did want to mention that I know there's NRCS folks on here, and of course, those of us in soil and water know that many of these, if not all of these processes, can be found, of course, in your NRCS Part 650 Engineering Field Handbook, Chapter 2, Rust Estimating Runoff, Chapter 7, Grass Waterways, et cetera, right? You can also do the TR 55 manual, Urban Hydrology for small watersheds. We'll also provide the process, which I'm sure most folks on the line are familiar with. But that was another reason I wanted everyone to know I chose these guys because their design process is so similar, if not identical. So right, once we know where we want to site it, once we know how much water we're going to deal with, whether it's, discharge, whether it's a volume or cubic feet per second, we then need to determine, right, how we're going to either outlet the water or deal with said water that we're capturing. So we need to calculate the shear stress as well as the shapes and designs of our outlets, et cetera, et cetera. So I will get into it now. So this was the first WASCOB I designed and implemented. This is serving a 5-acre sub-drainage area immediately behind said WASCOB. We've got a perched water table here, so there is constant seep coming from the back wall. I'll be the first to say I definitely over-designed this one. This is a very large WASCOB. It's more like a swimming pool than a WASCOB, but so it is. As you can see in the back corner, we've got the emergency spillway, and this is on the very top of the hill in Skinny Atlas. This was a winter implementation, which had its own issues and headaches. So all of these WASCOBs I will be showing you are on the same farm, and this is the one that I designed and implemented a few years ago. The following will be BMPs that had exceeded their lifespan, but this year we went out and reassessed them and determined that with some cleaning out and with some addressing the standpipes, they were still functional. So this is all on the same farm. We're just moving downslope little by little. So this is another wascob. You can see the berm, right? We know these wascobs are all either excavated, holes in the ground or some sort of impounded area. So you can see the berm I'm standing on and taking the picture. This wascob was completely overgrown with buckthorn and, honeysuckle, our favorite invasives. And the standpipe was still functional, as was the underground tile line outlet. So we actually didn't have too much trouble cleaning this one out. That was done this summer. Likewise, here's another wascab. So this is one you can see much more, not quite as well formed, much more of the topography working for us here. This is, again, same farm, just a little bit down, and same excavator, same contractor cleaned all three of these for us. Likewise, this is on another farm field. We're not quite down to Skinny Atlas Lake, but we're getting there. As you can see, right, one of the reasons that the wascabs do lose function and become less operational is one of the things that frequently gets us and our farmers in trouble is O&M, right? Operations and maintenance can be vital to the functioning of said BMPs within the 10-year lifespan of the vast majority of our BMPs. So granted, these had all exceeded their 10-year lifespan that I think is on the wascab. However, part of the reason that their functioning had decreased was because there had been no maintenance whatsoever. This particular wascab was all cattails, and actually we had to snake the standpipe there and try and figure out what was going on with the underground outlet because that was not functioning as designed. All right, so once again, I'll keep on moving forward here. So, like I was saying before with the wascabs, yes, these names are often interchangeable, but those of us, of course, know that there are differences, right? We know that the diversions are quite frequently at the top of the slope or the bottom of the slope, and they're going across the slope, not necessarily up and down the slope, whereas the grass waterways we frequently cite in draws, right, or natural topography where there's already water moving. Yes, of course, we need to be careful that they're not always inundated. Otherwise, the grass won't take. And we also know that our stone line channels have a function at a time and a place as well. All right. So I just wanted to repeat something that we all know, of course. All right, so moving forward into our example. So this is a Shotwell Brook watershed. What we had here was some pretty significant erosion moving from the right of your screen over towards the trucks over there and the excavator. Some pretty significant gully and real erosion. And we had significant turbidity and Shotwell Brook, which outlets into Skinny Atlas Lake. Immediately adjacent to one of the intake pipes for the city of Syracuse's drinking water, hence our consternation. So we proposed, and with the farmer's permission, implemented this 300-foot, I think it was 200-foot diversion / grass line waterway. This is the implementation during, and this is after it was completed, and you can see our heavy straw mulch. And then this is, of course, I'm standing at the outlet now. Shotwell Brook is immediately behind me, looking back up into the farm fields here. So we really like the diversions in that they are minimally invasive, they are easy to implement, and they're very cheap. Most of the expense for these is honestly the stone and sometimes I guess if the excavation work if it gets really big. Now, so also in the foreground / just behind the outlet here, you see a broad-based dip. This is something we implement quite frequently here in Onondaga County, in that our diversions are often immediately adjacent to or the outlets, right? We're right there by the headlands, and this is where we would want the farmer to be able to cross this diversion without damaging, rutting, et cetera, et cetera. So quite a few of our diversions have these broad-based dips such that the farmer can still get his equipment across without rutting up our diversion per se. This is another diversion, same farmer, other side of Shotwell Brook now. We were having also similar issues, excuse me. Um, Up there in the distance where you can see that hay bale far away. So the water comes down the slope, and believe it or not, it would make a turn and come down towards our truck here. It's all based on the topography. And this was some quite significant rilling, and this was a we had like some 1 and 2 foot gullies starting to form across this farm field. So we went out and we did some assessment of the topography, and we determined that if we'd sited a diversion here, we'd be able to capture a large amount, if not most of the water coming down the slope at the far end of this diversion and convey it to, once again, Shotwell Brook is behind us a few hundred feet. So this diversion was in fact 700 feet long. And as you can see, it's shallow, it's deeper, but it's also quite a bit narrower. Uh, so this was just after implementation. As you can see, we've got the truck and we've got the hay. In the very distance there, you can see the interns doing the seeding and mulching for me. So this is where the water came down. So the water would come from the right, it would go across, get past this hay bale here, and then it would turn and head down there towards the trucks. And Shotwell Brook is in the distance where you can see kind of those willows popping up out there past the alfalfa. And so with this, we're grabbing the water as it comes down the slope. Once we've got another broad-based dip so that the farmer and his equipment can cross without damaging the diversion. And we actually put an inlet here so that some of the stone is so that when during the high flow events, it's not damaging the inlet to this diversion. And so here, this is, further on in the season, how it's going. Uh, I chose the picture without the velvet leaf because, well, I didn't want to show the picture without the velvet leaf. But this is the same diversion. So as you can see, it came along pretty nicely. We've been out there in some real big storms, and it is functioning as designed and as planned. Once again, the efficacy of these is pretty much in the fact that they're really cheap and they're really easy. I think I've probably worked on 10 to 12 diversions at this point. Maybe 3 or 4 wascobs, and yeah, similarly 5 or 6 stream crossings, right? So that's another reason why I said these are the big three. Uh, Nothing like being in your first your first staff meeting, and people are throwing around terms like wascobs, and I remember sitting there saying, "What in goodness gracious is a wascob?" And you're in government when everyone's speaking in alphabet soup, right? So at any rate, continuing walking down. So yeah, Shotwell Brook is down there, and this is ultimately outletting into Shotwell Brook. Moving on, the stream crossing. So the stream crossing, another structural, not so much in the fact that we're trying to capture the water, but we are trying to decrease the turbidity and the potential for the sediment migrating, right? Um, So I have had to implement quite a few of these because of how ubiquitous our streams are here in the county. Of course, we all know that permitting with our partners, the DEC, can be a hair-raising experience. So what I would recommend in your county, depending on your relationship back and forth with your DEC, is permit as soon as possible. Here in Onondaga County, Region 7, We've had uh, we've had permits take as long as 10 months to a year, and now there seem to be getting a little bit better handle on the process. So it's more like 4 to 6 months, but it isn't by no means something that you can expect to have very quickly. All right. And of course, let's remind us all, if it's a CET stream, we have to permit with the DEC. If it is not a CET stream, then you do not need to permit with the DEC. So I would like to remind that too. Sometimes it's nice when you have a C without a T because you can just get in there and work. Also, let's recall Army Corps of Engineer. If you are doing stream stuff on ag land, you have the ag exemption under Army Corps, and you do not need to permit that unless you are exceeding 500 linear feet of stream bank disturbance or in excess of 1 cubic yard per linear foot is their threshold for permitting. So all things to consider when doing your design and your what considering your timeline for the implementation of your project, because permitting is of course nice to do in the winter, and you only hope it will land by the time your guys are ready to go get in the creek. So as you can see, I have a reoccurring theme here, over designing things on my first time. This was the first stream crossing I put in. I believe both Tim and PJ have been here when I was trying to get my JAA. I took them out there. We refer to this one colloquially in the office as the helipad, in that this is cattle slats, but it's 9 cattle slats. Initially, I wanted to make this 16 feet wide as the crossing, and our farmer was insistent that he needed it to be even larger than that. So this is actually a 24-foot wide crossing. Those cattle slats measure 6 by 8. And so as you can see, the long way is the 8. And so we've got 3 across, we've got 24 foot. And so we did require that the farmer pay for the 3 additional cattle slats, in that the average access road is generally 12 to 14 feet wide. And so we said, hey, look, if you want additional cattle slats, you're going to have to pay for that. So this is the survey. I think this is probably me doing the as-built survey. So as you can see, we've got our 9 cattle slats. We've got our gravel on both sides of the approach. We've got the seeding and mulching. We've got the inlet and the outlet stone. One of the reasons this was a great one was because that was an active head cut that was marching up. And so getting the cattle slats as well as the outlet apron effectively arrested the head cut, which could have produced much more a greater deal of problems for us. So as I said, this was clearly over-engineered and over-designed, but I guess part of it was because that's what the farmer wanted, and so that is the helipad. Um, this is it following season. As you can see, the water is now moving over it, and it looks much more natural and established here. Um, I'm not sure if this is when Tim and PJ came out to see it, but at any rate, so this is another one I implemented on Grout Brook, the famous Grout Brook, at the southern end of Skinny Atlas Lake, from which, uh, award-winning trout are pulled every year. This is one of our farmers down in Homer, Cortland area. Uh, this one was also particularly a headache to permit through the DEC, but all things being equal, we got it in. So this was obviously a much smaller crossing. That is what you would expect in your actual usual farm crossing. And this is what it looked like a season later. So you can see that the substrate has started to move over it. It stops looking so much like a bunch of cattle slats, stacked in a stream, and starts looking more natural. And so I have done, like I said, 5 or 6 of these, and this is something that I've done. This is my first this year, was a timber mat stream crossing. This was pretty interesting in that the stream was so incised down in, this is also the same farm, Skinny Atlas area. The stream was so incised that there was no getting down into the creek. So we decided that we would put timber mats over the top, and that seemed to be effective. So this was right around the time our DEC started suggesting we revert to the general permit. So previously they were asking us to use the joint application, and now they've asked that we start moving towards a general permit, which of course we all prefer. But and because in that it's supposed to expedite the permitting process, but just as a heads up, this is the first time I was told to use the general permit, but it did seem to help facilitate the timeline at the very least. So, as usual, I talked way too fast and got through way too much of my material in far too quickly. So I'll just return to one or two topics that I kind of breezed over. And that I guess and I don't want to hit on it too hard because I know uh Tim puts together Tim has a wonderful set of classes on Udemy, where you can learn to do the stream crossing and you can learn about hydrology. And that is something that is encouraged in all of our soil and waters, is that you take Tim's classes, which is where, of course, I was first introduced to soil and the stream crossing BMP. And that's why I didn't want to get into this too much, but I did want to mention again these programs, right? EFH2 and EFT are very helpful for the design process. Now, of course, you can pull out your chapters in NRCS 650 and do these by hand, but having these programs is very facilitates the design process enormously. EFT is a little bit clunky in engineering field tools. And at one point, my IT department made me pull it off because it was apparently uh, a risk for hacking. So there, it's also something to keep in mind, is that sometimes these programs are not quite as functional as you would like them to be. And also, we frequently need to check for the most recent update to minimize our risk, because these days we all know that the risk of bad actors is pretty prevalent. But so that was the long and short of it. Chapter 7 in the NRCS 650 is grass waterways. Chapter 9 is diversions. Chapter 8 is terraces, right? Terraces slash wascobs. Obviously, I'm not getting into the design process here, but pulling out one of those chapters will walk you through it in intricate detail. I'd also encourage anybody who hasn't, I'm speaking to a room of experienced conservationists here. The Blue Book has also got great reference, the New York State Blue Book. I frequently will use those specs to give to my contractors, in that it's pretty straightforward. Its descriptions are there, and they're not necessarily ways that they can get themselves confused. But the long and the short of it being, it's going through this process and designing and implementing these BMPs over and over again is actually what initiated the conversation with my executive director about pursuing the engineering and training route. In that my academic my academic achievements, or whatever, my degree at ESF did make me eligible to take the engineering exam. And when we started talking about the paucity of engineers in our field and how so many of them are close to retirement, it seemed that this was a good time for me to go ahead and begin that career path as well. And so thanks also to my executive director, who's provided me the opportunity to take the FE and then take the PE and move on and become our uh, local, our in-house engineer. I'm sorry, Tim. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I just saw someone else raise their hand, so I thought we might be doing that for question and answer. Are we to that point yet?
Yeah, we are. I definitely went through all of my material, like I
Okay.
said, very
Okay, so
quickly.
how do you feel about kind of the current best practice for aquatic organism passage when we're laying out ford crossing, not just cattle slack crossings, but any ford. Like for AOP, we're supposed to be mimicking the natural stream cross section, especially having a low flow channel in the middle for dry periods. Like, does DC give you flack about that, or like how do you, I don't know, how do you reconcile the two kind of opposite design objectives?
Sure. Well, you know what? In some respects, I've been fortunate that many of the stream crossings I've had to implement have been higher up the hillsides, such that uh, the spawning and the migration of said aquatic organisms is minimal. So like down by the flats, right, where the streams come down off the hill and hit the flat area, I think that's more of an issue. But some of our streams up in Skinny Atlas at the top of the hill, I mean, there nobody, the trout would have to fly to get up there. So that sometimes is not such a big issue. But yes, I understand what you're saying. Yes, I do get flack about aquatic organism passage. And in all honesty, I think I've been blessed that I haven't had to address it with this low flow channel necessarily. Um, that Grout Brook crossing that never stops flowing at a good rate there. Um, I'm trying to think of some of the other creeks I put them in. And I think again, it's a blessing in some ways that the Skinny Atlas topography is what it is because when I'm at the top of the hill, I don't have to worry about that. And sure, sometimes when I'm doing the culvert assessments, I will look at that, but we frequently fall into the same category where it's like, well, hey, I'm at the top of a hill here. I don't think the trout are getting up here. I don't, and I don't see that there's going to be any aquatic organisms, especially the fish that they're after, trying to get through this. So yeah, they give me pushback, but I think my situation again is Onondaga specific in that many of these I've done have been high enough up in the hills that there isn't that abundance of aquatic organism trying to get through it.
Great answer. Thanks.
Yeah.
Chris, I wanted to thank you for your presentation. Uh, I also had my hand raised, but I don't want to. I want to give other folks the opportunity to ask questions of you in the remaining minutes that we have here. So if anybody has a question, now would be a good time. I have a couple, but
So,
go right ahead,
Scott,
Sean.
there is one question in the chat. It says, has the state considered moving over to using HydroCAD?
I know that at our skills, con skills, or at symposium last year, they did a HydroCAD training. I did not sit on it, but I do know that it is being taught to our technicians. The issue we have, and I'm sure you guys can relate to this, so many of the soil and waters in that there are these sort of autonomous units, they don't all function under the same, software suites or whatever. I mean, everyone's got Word, but we don't all have CAD. We don't have CAD in this office, so that's why I try to use EFT, right? I can bug my director to get us CAD, but we all know that sometimes works, but sometimes it doesn't. And also, these subscription services now, right? So it's several $1,000s a year for the CAD. And actually, what he's asked us to do is research open source software this winter. So, QCAD and those sorts of things. He's asked us to look into in that because I've expressed if I'm going to do this FEPE thing, I should probably have a CAD resource that I can use. We even had, I saw Paula's on here. We had Paula come in and give us a training so that we could use CAD. But, if I don't have the software, Paula's training is sitting, in a folder on my desktop that, was great and all, but so yes, the state is trying to get us all to move towards those sort of powerful software suites that can really facilitate our work. However, individual units on the county level may or may not have the resources or capacity for said software suites.
Excellent answer there, Chris. It is something that comes up all the time is that each district is its own entity and free to do what they want. I do have a question though, and not as a layman, as somebody who's not necessarily or definitely not involved in design, but just an observer. You mentioned there in your talk that sometimes you reference some data, I think you said provided by Cornell or other tables for sizing of wasp cobs and crossings and ditches and the like. My question is, have those tables been changing over the past couple of years as we see more extreme uh, rain events crossing the state? Are those values uh, changing at all, or are these the same values that you might have seen in those tables, say, 15 years ago?
That's a good question. I think the tables are, the issue we always used to say, right, and here in the community would say, well, we call it the 100-year storm, but maybe that's nomenclature is incorrect, right? We call it the 50-year storm, but maybe it's more like the 5-year storm. So I feel that the tables from that Cornell Extreme Precipitation website are still pretty good. So like if I know that if I get over an inch and a half of precip, I should probably go check this culvert, that culvert, this culvert, that culvert, right? Um, I think that their values are still representative of what we would think of those extreme weather events. Now, once again, like I said to you before, I have a note as a scientist. We always talk about this. What would be great to go out and compare what actually the extreme precip would be, under that 25-year storm, that 50-year storm, what I really get versus what that that table says. Just like I'd love to go out and measure discharge and compare it to what StreamSat says versus what EFH2 says and determine, which one is the real. I mean, but we also know we frequently will try and design these things to the worst case scenario, right? So that's also why sometimes I say, hey, well, I'm going to use the worst case scenario. So if this precipitation seems a little bit low, then maybe I'll bump it up to the higher named storm. And then I'll assume that my land use is, has already been cut or is bare soil, et cetera, so that I'm capturing the worst case scenario as opposed to undersizing or under designing something and then having to deal with that.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of times where you thought that you were over engineering things, but I wonder sometimes in today's environment, and especially when you're dealing with concentrated flows of water, if that's even possible. I mean, uh, in the wake of and I'm going back some time here, I'll date myself, the 2006 flood and the recovery efforts that took place in the wake of that flood, most of what got done were stream crossings and the fences that line, anything that was in the stream corridor pretty much got wiped out. And so, thinking ahead to the next event, we've had a few since then, Lee, Irene, and others, and certainly a lot of localized events that, that bigger stuff probably comes in handy. Although I'm sure there's arguments and scenarios where you wouldn't want to do that. But, as a layman, I would just think that that kind of armoring, if you will, of critical infrastructure is pretty important. But
Yeah, when I do culvert assessment reports for the municipalities, I provide them with scenarios, right? So I say, because a lot of the DOTs will design culverts to the 2-year storm, right? So I will give them scenarios, say, hey, under the 5-year, the 10-year, the 25, the 50, you'll have this situation, you'll have this much overtopping, right? Also, thanks to many of Tim's Udemy classes, right? We've got those really cool HY8, all those other software suites. And so I'll give them scenarios, and while my director is hoping, and I do suggest, the 10-year at the minimum, we provide them scenarios, but also the verbiage that says, look, the return on the investment is your decision to make. You have to determine, do you want to put in this giant culvert that's going to be super expensive, or would you just rather repair the road every time it floods? I mean, that's not my call to make, that's their call to make. But we do say this will happen under this scenario and this will happen under this scenario.
For sure. Well, thank you for that. And I see we're a little bit past the agenda, but you did touch on one question. But if you could just briefly say, as somebody who's engineering and training, and in the circumstances that we were all in, could you briefly say what do you think of your future career path? Are you happy with the choice you make? You think you are going to be going into situations where there's going to be plenty of demand and it's good for your career? And the reason I ask is there may be educators on the line. We're talking to students, and maybe your experience might encourage a few of them to pursue.
No, it was actually quite an epiphany, right? I got hired on initially as an arborist, but I did have my master's from ESF, and as I did mention to you, Scott, ESF used to offer a really whiz-bang dual major that was forestry and engineering, and I think they got away from that for a few recently, but I think those sorts of opportunities need to go hand in hand with something else you guys were also discussing earlier, which is onboarding the next generation. I'm a Stumpy, I'm an ESFer, loud and proud, but soil and waters definitely didn't come up anywhere near enough. I mean, in soils class, with Briggs, we talked about soil and water a little bit, but when I was graduating, it didn't even occur to me to come over here to the soil and water office where I found such a great home. So yes, I think this engineering path is going to be fantastic for my career. And I think something that everyone on the line knows is that this is such an interdisciplinary field. We wear many hats, we do many things. And I think, that's hand in glove with this engineering implementation, right? You have to be able to walk and chew gum, you have to be able to juggle whatever metaphor you want to put on it. You have to be able to do a lot of things. But we all know if you're in this field, you like getting your boots dirty, you want to be outside, you wouldn't mind taking some measurements, and a little bit of rain is going to scare us away because we're not made of sugar. So, yeah, I think this is a great career path. I am excited to be able to provide this service to, right? We right now we use Oneida's engineer, who is also a retired state engineer who then came out of retirement to go work at Oneida. So, I mean, it's clear that the demand is there. It's clear that we need a pipeline, and I'm excited to think that our state soil and water committee has acknowledged that and is moving to increase the number of folks that are performing that.
Yes, and they are. We're working on it as well. And thank you for that. And note to everybody in the crowd here that we no longer want soil and water to be the best kept secret in government, and I guess that will now extend to education, and that to the degree that the academics can pave the way for future students to soil and water, I think that'll be beneficial to us all. Your presentation, I'm just going to segue right into the next presentation so as not to lose too much time. Chris, thank you again. As everybody probably picked up on, the three most popular BMPs that Chris works on routinely in the field all involve water management of one form or another. I think in the environment of climate change, it becomes even more important. So that's a nice tee up for our next presentation presenter, Tim Clark, our very own Tim Clark from the Department of Ag and Markets, who's going to be talking about hydrological modeling for agricultural engineering projects. And so with that, Tim, I'll hand it off to you. You have up until 11 o'clock, including questions. I apologize for biting into your time here, but take it away, Tim.
Yeah, that's fine. Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to leave the video off. I think I had some trouble with my VPN on Tuesday. I just want to conserve bandwidth. I'll turn it back on for Q&A later. I put together this presentation kind of as with the thought of introducing engineers that already know urban hydrology to kind of the practices that we do for rural and agricultural hydrology. So that was kind of the bent that I had when preparing the slides. Some of this material is from years ago hydrology in-person classes that Paula Bagley and I put on. So I saw Paula on the line. Just want to shout out a thanks for some of that material. You'll see as we go through. For the hour, we're going to cover quite a few sections. Okay, we're going to go through background information, rainfall, mapping a drainage area, runoff curve numbers, runoff volume, time of concentration, and peak discharge. I'll try and pause for questions at the end of each section so you don't have to kind of remember to the very end. Um, a lot of this information is from manuals, but there's a fair amount that's just, my opinion. So feel free to, feel free to ask questions during each section, and if you disagree or don't understand something. Right into the background section. Just a brief overview of what is hydrology. Hydrology is kind of this cycle of water that goes across the land. Some goes into the ground, goes into the oceans, comes back up into the sky, makes clouds. Clouds form rain. Okay, and this whole hydrologic cycle is what we are referring to when we say hydrology. It's the properties, the distribution, and the movement. So not only just where the water's going, but like what is it carrying? What salinity? What are the properties of it? Land, underground, oceans, and atmosphere. And what we're most concerned with in, conservation work is called runoff hydrology. And we're looking at rain that falls on the ground, runs off through a watershed down to a design point. So these are some practices that, need hydrologic designs. Some of them that Chris covered in the first presentation, diversions, terraces, urban closed drainage networks need this kind of design, flood control, green infrastructure, stream restoration, culverts, manure storages, basically everything that's out there on the landscape that can be subject to rainfall. You need some sort of design of how much rainfall is going to come down to it, and a way to either get rid of it or to manage it safely. I look at it, hydrologic designs as kind of um, three different practice areas, if you will. The total runoff volume, that's kind of like how much rain runs off the surface of your watershed. And then other practices will need to know the peak discharge. So that's like at a design point down further in the watershed. You're going to have to know like how much water per second is flowing past your point. And that's different from total runoff volume. Like the total runoff volume is just a volume. It doesn't have anything to do with the flow rates coming down through a stream. That's peak discharge. And then a third component, which we're not really going to get into in this course, but it's called volume routing. And that's where you model a volume of water that is moving through a system or a structure. So say moving a large volume of water under a bridge or through a sluice gate or over a dam or through a spillway. That kind of gets more into hydraulics, but it's a associated part of hydrology. We have a few different methods for completing hydrologic models or hydrologic designs. I think the best source of information is usually stream gauge data. So that's when you have like a bridge and there's a gauging station at the bridge that records stream flows there for every minute or every hour. That's really the best source of information. If you have a bridge at a gauged site, that should be the information you're using to do the design. The next best are called regional curves. And these curves are scientifically derived from stream gauge data on a regional basis. So like you wouldn't develop a regional curve for like the entire Northeast United States or even the state of New York. You develop regional curves for smaller ecological or weather regions in the state. So these regional curves are what stream stats is based on. And the scientists that developed stream stats, created all these regional curves, and they created regions across the state that have kind of uniform weather patterns and uniform topology. Next best is where we get into hydrologic modeling. Okay, and these are the SCS or NRCS methods. That's the focus of this presentation. For rural hydrology, we'll be using the EFH2 method. For urban hydrology, typically we'll use TR20 and TR55 with some more advanced time of concentration methods that we'll get to in a minute. Last up, I want to throw in the rational method. This was the first hydrologic method that I learned when I was starting. It's used for mostly storm sewer systems. It's kind of a simplified method. It gets the job done, but it comes in here in last place. As far as references, if you want to learn more about this topic, the primary reference for this presentation is this. It's called EFH2. It's part 650 of the National Engineering Handbook, Engineering Field Handbook, Chapter 2. So it's kind of like a handbook within inside a handbook, and it's Chapter 2 of that handbook. You can find it on the NRCS e-directives site. And it was recently updated in 2021. So it's got a lot of good information and current best of the practice techniques and information. I really like this diagram. I know these are hydrographs, which we haven't covered yet. A hydrograph is just a time series of how much water is flowing past a point. And this is meant to show how different shaped watersheds and size watersheds just produce different volumes of water and different hydrographs. So if you have, say, a very small watershed like this one, you'll get a very small runoff volume. And as you get larger and larger, you get larger and larger volumes, and the peak flow for that design point will be later and later in time. Similarly, with different shape watersheds, you can see there's like just different. If it's long and skinny, you might have a steep, high flow really early in the storm, and as you get more diffuse and spread out, you might get a later delayed peak runoff. Throughout EFH2, there will be like warnings and caveats, like don't use this procedure for complicated things, particularly if there's ponds, wetlands, storage in the watershed. They give guidance to use the procedures in NEH 630. That's another chapter in the National Engineering Handbook, just called Hydrology. So remember I said there was the Engineering Field Handbook, which is inside the National Engineer Handbook. This is just, like another chapter in the National Engineering Handbook that covers hydrology in extreme detail. There's like hundreds of pages on a ton of different topics. And as you might expect, if you've done hydrologic modeling, they suggest like the state of practice. You should split the watershed up into smaller sub-catchments, model storage individually, splitting it up in as much detail as you can if you have storage or ponds or wetlands or that stuff. Okay, any questions on this introductory part? Going to move into rainfall. So rainfall, the way we bring rainfall into hydrologic modeling is with rainfall distributions. This is like how intense the rain falls over a theoretical storm. Uh, we we use these 24-hour storms as like um, a theoretical storm that we can drop over the landscape and run through our practices. And it just kind of represents a bad storm, bad thunderstorm in the summer. Historically, we had these distributions that were called type 2 and 3, and I think there was a 3A. And they kind of sought to mimic rainfall patterns at different parts of the country. Um, so I think most of New York was type 2, Long Island was a different type. Anyways, there's a storm duration of 24 hours, and the intensity of the rainfall varies over the storm period. In 2013, the Northeast Regional Climate Center updated distributions and made some specific to the Northeast United States. We still have the 24-hour storm duration, but now we have these distributions that are called A, B, C, and D, and they're more specific to New York rainfall. So just giving you an example of what A distribution looks like. This is a chart. The storm duration is on the bottom, 24 hours. So as the storm starts at 0 hours, it gently falls. Then at the middle of the storm, it's super intense and it tapers off. And this chart shows all four of the curves that we're currently using, A, B, C, and D. Um, and that's that. Now, each rainfall distribution, you still need like a rainfall depth or, how much rainfall is going to fall on your surface to use a distribution. A distribution doesn't say anything about the depth total. It's just a percent, like cumulative rainfall on this axis. It goes from 0 to 1. It doesn't, we're not modeling just 1 inch of rainfall for every storm. This is going to be scaled to however many inches of rainfall are at your site in your design storm. So there's basically two ways that we get rainfall depths. I guess three. I forgot about the Cornell data. Um, I recommend most people, if you're going to try and do a site-specific rainfall, to use the NOAA Precipitation Frequency Data Server. That's NOAA's official website, and it's updated with all the latest and greatest. It's an interactive map. You go to your site and you click it, and that's how you get site-specific data. A lot of people that use HydroCAD modeling will use site-specific data. It's kind of the best practice. For using EFH2, it's totally fine to use rainfall distribution maps. These are not updated continuously. I think these were updated in 2019, though, so it's pretty good data. And the distribution map looks like this. It's a state of like across the state of New York. There's different counties. I know some counties will all be type A, B, C, or D. Here's that as a blow up. If you have a county that is on one of these borders here, you can see there's little like page shape outlines. There's a reference for those, which gives you detail sheets. And this is called the New York State EFH2 supplement. This is on our New York State FOTG site, which is the Field Office Technical Guide. If you don't know where to get this stuff, just contact me. I can run you through it. It's kind of complicated. But hopefully most of the people in the room are familiar with photog. If not, contact me. All right, so these are distributions, right? We still are looking for rainfall amounts. So the EFH2 supplement also has rainfall amounts. Most counties have just one rainfall value for all the design storms. Some counties, they're split. So like, these counties that have red lines through them, there's maps in the supplement also that split out the rainfall. So this one, Greene County, they've got like 4 different regions. So there'll be a rainfall for each of these zones uh, um, in inside Greene County. And then inside, this is in the EFH2 supplement. It's also kind of baked into the EFH2 software. But in the supplement, there's these charts where you can check the rainfall values. So yeah, for each county, there's if there's separate regions in the county, it'll give different rainfall values for those 2 regions. All right, so moving on from rainfall, we're going to quickly go through mapping a drainage area. Any questions on rainfall?
Tim, I had a question on
Yeah, go
rainfall.
ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with these processes and I'm prone to asking stupid questions, so this may be one. The distribution maps that you were showing, is that the distribution of the amount of rain that falls? In other words, does that map that you're showing right now, are these types, is like where a lot of rain falls and type D where not a lot of rain falls over the course of a year or some time period? Or is it, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to ask and find out is, are there parts in the state that are particularly dry or particularly wet?
No, it's taking a storm and trying to predict how intense the most intense rainfall is. So in the synthetic distribution, we have kind of like this middle part of the storm where most of the rain falls.
Mhm.
So, you know, curve D, cur curve D has more rainfall in the first part of the storm and the last part of the storm. Curve A, the blue line, has the least amount of rainfall in the beginning and the end. So it has curve A has the most steep part in the middle of the storm. So they're saying that curve A has the most intense of the intense rainfalls. So if you jump back to
Interesting. Yeah.
the map, so it's trying to gauge which regions have slightly, it's not even a big difference. It's like a slightly more intense rainfall during the most intense period. And it's just based on aggregating rainfall storm data over, the last 40 years.
Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
that.
So mapping a drainage area, if you want to do a hydrologic study, you'll need to know what your drainage area looks like and how much water's coming down to it, to your design point. Lots of different data sources. There's, hand surveys, field surveys, rod and level surveys you can do. Sometimes you'll have a TIN or a DTM. That's this kind of triangulated surface model from either a professional survey or like an EFH or EFT survey, a total station survey or a robot. You might have this. You might have LiDAR-based data. That's what this is. It's a contour map from LiDAR. In the worst case, you'll have USGS mapping. This is not as detailed as the other sources. And then to map out a drainage area on something like this, we got to start from your design point. That's going to be the place where your built practices, your wascob, or the outlet of your diversion or grass waterway. You work up through the watershed going perpendicular to contours. There's some general rules. If you're on the nose of a hill, your watershed's gonna, go perpendicular right down the nose of the hill. If you come to a saddle, that'll be a divide in watersheds. If you're on a water course, The contours always point up the hill. And like when we do in-person classes, we'll do like a bunch of exercises where the students delineate a watershed because it's pretty important. Even today with software tools that kind of do it automatically, you need to have some ground truthing experience to like be able to pick out little errors and stuff. So for this watershed, this is an example delineation. It's somewhat subject to opinion interpretation. For example, like coming up this slope, it's possible that it reaches all the way to the peak, um, or it's possible that the water splits and diverts below it. Ditches often have an impact that's not visible in LiDAR, or it's sometimes not picked up on ground surveys. So the ground truthing aspect, whatever level of risk you're willing to assume with kind of the shoddy modeling, you have to make up for that with ground truthing. So if it's a really key important structure, you got to make sure you're out there and checking where the ditches flow and if there's natural impediments that weren't picked up on your survey. Want to mention stream stats. Hopefully most people are familiar with that. This is a pretty old screenshot. Oops. But it looks, kind of the same. Stream stats lets you delineate the watershed from these blue lines. I'm not sure if they're just the blue line stream network, but it has to be pretty much a delineated stream in order to do the watershed. You can't just pick a random point out in space, but it'll delineate a watershed and do statistics for that. And you can export this into GIS. Speaking of GIS, lots of people use GIS tools to delineate watersheds, and there's pretty good LiDAR data for the entire state. This is a screenshot from the NRCS engineering tools for ArcGIS Pro, which is a good hydrology package. It's kind of being phased out in favor of nets, which is something else, but districts can use this. It's a little bit buggy. Um, Anyways, it's an example of a software tool. It uses pretty much all built-in tools in ArcGIS Pro. So if you're just doing it on your own, you also have access to these delineation tools. I'm going to move out of modeling a watershed, or move out of delineating the watershed. Any questions on that? Our next topic is runoff curve numbers. So this is where we get into trying to figure out how much of the rain runs off the surface of the ground. And it's governed by an equation. This is the NRCS runoff equation. I don't expect you to memorize this, but anyways, Q is the runoff in inches. It's a little confusing because sometimes we use Q as a flow rate for hydraulics. In this case, Q is just runoff in inches. P is rainfall in inches. IA is initial abstraction. And S is the potential maximum retention after runoff begins. So IA is kind of how much, I'll get to it actually. IA is all the losses before runoff begins. So any water that's intercepted in surface depressions, it's just wetting the leaves, water loss, evaporation, and infiltration. It's basically I like to think of it as water that infiltrates before before any runoff happens. So if your storm is small enough, like just getting away from the synthetic storms, just think of your average really light rainstorm in the summertime. You might get 15 minutes of sprinkle and none of the water runs off. It all soaks in or it just evaporates instantly. That's all water that is inside this IA term, initial abstraction. And then removing, sorry, going back to the formula, uh, hyd hydrologic modelers to simplify these formulas. So they have a simplification for this, which becomes this one. So the flow rate is this term if the rainfall is greater than IA, and then uh, the runoff rainfall is less than IA. So, like I was having you imagine a minute ago, if your rainfall is just a very light storm and doesn't go over the threshold of the initial abstraction, you won't get any runoff. And that kind of makes sense, especially like think of a hot summer day, a very light rain, on a asphalt parking lot that's the parking lot is 200 degrees. You won't get any runoff from that if the rainfall is light enough. Runoff curve numbers are just kind of I don't want to say imaginary, just a convention that's been created to um yeah, to use to model different surfaces. So the curve number itself doesn't have any like physical any relation to a physical attribute. Like a lot of people will get confused and think that the curve number is the percent of runoff. That's not right. It's an abstract term. So in the literature, curve number is 1000 over 10 plus S. S, if you recall, enough that is sorry. S is the water retained after runoff begins. So initial abstraction is the runoff that's retained before runoff begins. S is the runoff that's retained after runoff begins. And this is a chart that should be familiar to a lot of people. It's the curve number chart. We use this for lots of different things, like in the Blue Book. They use it for designing sediment traps. And for hydrologic modeling, yeah, we use it for with values. Shoot, I thought I had a different slide in there. Yeah, okay. So we're just doing curve numbers. So this is the curve number that's 100. It generally goes from 40 to 100. There's like a mathematical error if you use a value less than 40, it's like a divide by zero error. Okay, and if you're using the FH2 software, all these curve numbers for different land uses are listed in the RCN tab. Similar for HydroCAD, it has all these curve numbers built in. Basically, for each land use, say you have woods, grass combination, you'll get 3 different scores, a poor, fair, and a good condition. And then for each hydrologic soil group, you'll have a different value. A soils infiltrate the best, D soils infiltrate the worst. So the curve number values will always be higher for the D soils than for the A, B, and C soils. And this is what the calculator looks like for EFH2. If you're using HydroCAD, it looks more like this. It'll be, select a curve number, very similar information. You got different land cover types, a condition score, and then the ABCD hydrologic soil groups. So say you have a watershed that's already mapped, and you have hydrologic soil groups and soil names. Say you have 3 different soil types. If you have a map, say this example map, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 different kind of sub areas. 2 hydrologic soil groups. You can combine some of these into bigger areas. Basically, in our design, we're going to end up with a lot of little like sub areas of the watershed with unique combinations of hydrologic soil group and curve numbers. For this data, the soil names and the hydrologic soil groups, we typically get that from Web Soil Survey. Hopefully everyone's familiar with that. If not, just Google it. It's pretty easy to use. Once we have those soil names and hydrologic soil groups, we're going to overlay the land use type. So say on this example, we had pasture good condition, woods fair condition, and more pasture good condition. You can get this information either remotely from aerial photography or by walking the site. Once that's overlaid, you'll get a bunch of intersections where which splits the watershed up into a bunch of sub areas. So in this example, we have 5 unique sub areas with unique pasture or with unique ground conditions and hydrologic soil groups. And then for an entire watershed, common practice is to compute a weighted average of all these curve values. Each software I mentioned, EFH2 and HydroCAD, they have these calculators to help you compute a weighted average curve number for the watershed to use for your model. All right, so that is kind of a brief overview of curve numbers. I'm going to jump into runoff volume. Maybe speed up a little bit here. Runoff volume. I just thrown out an example. Like say you have a site, you've computed your curve number, like the previous method or the previous slides. You've computed the curve number to be 80, and your site receives 4 inches of rain. How many inches of rain are produced? This is like a erosion sediment control question. We use this kind of inquiry to size a sediment trap. You can go to your curve number chart, look for the 80 curve, which is this yellow one. You start with your rainfall at the bottom, 4 inches, read up on the chart to the yellow line of 80. And then read to the left, we'll give you direct runoff Q in inches. So if you have a rainfall on an 80 curve, 4 inches, only 2.04 inches of direct runoff will come off that watershed. All right, that's just inches. You would have to multiply that by the area of the watershed to give you a volume, storm volume. And just for your information, there's charts of a lot of this stuff. This is in EFH2, sorry. This is in the EFH2 chapter. You can go to a chart, and it's kind of the same basic information. Rainfall in inches, runoff curve number, and it'll give you the inches of direct runoff for those storms. So here, again, we're going to 4 inches, reading over to the 80 curve, and it gives you 2.04. So if you have a problem where you need the storm volume, that's the procedure to get to there. To get the peak discharge is a little more complicated, and we're going to get into that next. So in order to get a peak discharge, we kind of have to know how fast the water runs off your watershed. Remember that slide back near the beginning, different shaped watersheds have different different times for the peak flow to get down to your design point, depending on how steep the watershed is, how big it is. And the way we model that is called the time of concentration. For urban hydrology, there's various methods, usually involves breaking your longest flow path into different segments, which can often include like gutters and storm sewers, usually gutters and ditches, that kind of thing. typically for rural or agricultural projects, we'll use this NRCS lag equation. It's meant for rural watersheds where you don't have a bunch of built infrastructure carrying the water along. Uses these terms, the flow length, the curve number, and the average watershed slope. So in order to get those terms, in order to compute the time of concentration, you'd be looking at the flow length. It's just a length through the watershed of the maximum flow path, from like the most distant point all the way down to your design point. So that's a flow length in feet. And then the average watershed slope. I recommend most people to use GIS tools these days. Spatial analysts can just do a averaged inside your watershed over a LiDAR raster. That's the easiest method. There are traditional methods too, using a clinometer in the field, using topo maps, kind of taking representative areas and averaging them. And then there's this contour length method, which is described in EFH2. That's where you add up the length of all the contours, and there's a formula that relates that to average watershed slope. So once you get those two computed, you plug it into the lag equation, it gives you time of concentration, which is essential for computing peak discharge. EFH2 and the other NRCS methods, they're based on this dimensionless unit hydrograph principle. It comes with it comes from this research done in the 50s by Victor Makis. He derived this shape of a hydrograph to be kind of like a representative hydrograph shape that mimics natural watersheds. So he looked at a ton of different natural hydrographs and came up with this shape, and this is what basically all our peak discharge and hydrograph models are based on today. So basically, this is a dimensionless hydrograph with no set values for time or discharge. And then we use software to map this shape onto our real design storm, real rainfalls. One of the ways we do part of the derivation for this peak discharge method uses the equivalent triangular hydrograph. There's a derivation for this in NEH Part 630. If you're interested in learning more about the unit peak discharge method or equivalent triangular hydrographs, you're basically looking at how much rainfall falls in the first part of the hydrograph, and for the one that Victor Makis came up with, it's 37.5%. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but you can imagine if you know 37.5% of the rainfall is in this portion, you can use that information to like divvy this up into little segments, compute the flow rate at each point and the peak discharge. If you're using software, EFH2 is commonly used by most of the districts. As we discussed before, HydroCAD is in pretty good use too for more complicated designs, and a lot of engineers use it. This is the information page where you can type in your information. You fill in the state drop down, and it'll give you options for different county distribution areas. You enter your drainage area. You can enter your runoff curve number or use the calculator. Your watershed length is something you have to compute by yourself, and watershed slope also you have to compute by yourself. Once you have all those in, it'll run the lag equation for you and give you time of concentration. Then on the next page, it'll show your rainfall amounts based on your selected rainfall distribution. This dimensionless unit hydrograph, there are in fact multiple dimensionless unit hydrographs. Remember I said that one that was developed by Marcus in the 57s, in 1957 is kind of the one we all use. That's referred to as the standard dimensionless unit hydrograph. There's also another one for the Delmarva Peninsula on the east coast of the United States. So if you're there, definitely pick that one. So anyways, it populates this table with your return frequency, rainfall amounts, gives the peak flow rates, and the runoff in inches. And then on this page, you can select hydrographs for different design storms to plot. And they look like this. So if you're doing it as a design where you need, say, a drawing of a hydrograph and a peak discharge, you can use EFH2 and lag method for the time of concentration to get that. Again, if you're doing a design with where you just need the total runoff volume, you can pick that up off the curve number chart. And if you need to do design where you're routing a volume through a built structure, you want to use HydroCAD to model that in more detail. So that pretty much wraps up my overview of hydrologic modeling. Kind of glossed over a lot of areas. So if there's any detailed questions, feel free to shout those out. Do want to put in a plug for the basic hydrology GIS courses online. They're on the State Soil and Water Conservation Committee YouTube channel. Previously on Udemy, which is an e-learning platform. There's one for QGIS, which is an open source GIS platform, and there's one for ArcMap, which is now a deprecated Esri GIS platform. I'm working on an update for ArcGIS Pro, but it's taking some time. And those just have good workflows for importing LiDAR data into GIS and like running tools and doing joins and intersects to get your land use layers and stuff. So they're pretty useful. Check them out.
Tim, thank you so much for that presentation. That was really interesting. It brought me back many years to my school days. I'd like to offer an opportunity for anybody on the line to pose any questions. As usual, I have several stupid questions probably, but now is a good time. Tim covered quite a bit there, and or any comments that you might have. It's interesting to me, the sequence of the two presentations, because you can see, Tim, I think, how a pretty high level of understanding is required before you can really get to even the most basic common BMPs that Chris was talking about. And, sort of an appreciation for the engineering component of doing those practices.
Yeah, I was reminded of that recently. I was looking over materials from my last confrontation with the state board for engineering and land surveying, and part of their correspondence to me was like, hey, people have used their field work as engineering technicians in order to sit for the PE exam. So like, I won't get into why they said that. It was an irritating comment at the time, but the work,
Well, it impresses on me how important the work is, and having people out there who can do it. And you know me, I'm going to have to probably touch base with you later and pick your brains for a while on everything that you showed there. But I have a similar question, I guess, for you as I did for Chris. And the reference tables that you reference, or the software packages that you use, are those reference values updated, or are they, like as you pointed out, I think in the one do they go back to 1957 in their like the basis of it all?
Yeah, they're updated regularly or continuously. I think they're updated regularly. Like even the proficient precipitation data frequency server, it is based on an atlas that is updated regularly. It's not like a continuous stream of weather stations like intersecting with the website. It's like periodically scientists collect new data, they analyze it, and they update the values.
Right.
I think it's like, NOAA Atlas 14, Volume 10, Volume 11, Volume 12. As we go through time, there's new volumes of new data. It's not updated continuously because there's got to be data checking and error checking on all that. Nothing is up to date to today, but it is
Right.
updated regularly.
Right. That's always interested me because those numbers figure so so importantly into the final design. And when you look at the forecasts for climate change for the Northeast, and I think by now probably everybody's uh, experiences that the nature of the rainfall, its frequency, its intensity is in fact different, and so those numbers should be reflected in the reference material you're showing, which should translate into the practices that get designed and implemented. So that's all kind of good to know, I think.
Yeah, I think we have a good handle on that for road stream crossings. Like road stream crossings, you're supposed to increase your design flows by 110% or 120% based on a map that's in the flood resiliency guidelines. For ag practices, we don't have that legal requirement, so it's kind of like, yeah, you can design for a 10 instead of a 5 or maybe a 25 instead of a 10, but it's not as not as regimented an approach. Um,
Right. Well, hopefully something people are taking into account when they're in the field, given our present circumstances. And the flip side of that coin to me is that there's probably a lot of undersized practices out there that were designed based on numbers that have since changed, and that might present opportunities for folks in the
cer
field too.
Certainly undersized and or filled in with sediment. A lot of our
Mhm.
ag BMPs are subject to, yeah, they fill in with sediment. That reduces them a lot.
I have one other question, but I would pause for a moment for anybody to jump in the conversation. And Greg, thank you. Greg Albrecht is posted in the chat YouTube videos to the training that Tim has been mentioning. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Greg.
So Tim, I'll hit you up with another question. I probably asked this of you in at work at some point or another, but one thing I've come across frequently when reading about climate change and adaptation resiliency efforts is not only the the information about flood events, but the interaction between drought and flood, and the what happens to soils when they undergo a period of drought, the compaction, and I guess their ability to absorb water. That initial interaction, I think you called it, or whatever the term was.
Yeah, initial
Uh,
abstraction.
yes. When does that? How would that get picked up in your current processes? If there was like I don't know, let's just say an 8 month drought and then a large rain event, does that get picked up in your, all the tools that you were talking about in the development of a correct size or the peak hydrograph or any of that?
No, it doesn't, but like the hydrologic soil groups as NRCS maps them, like they are based on the entire, I guess not the entire, but they're based on a deep soil profile.
Hmm.
So it's not just like the first foot of soil. I don't know, like you picture a clay lake bed in a drought cracking like crazy and there'd be cracks everywhere. I'm not sure if the cracks extend down to the least permissible level layer. Um,
Right.
but at any rate, there is no like in common practice, there's no hydrologic modeling done for those edge cases. Like the other one that comes up commonly is heavy rainfall on frozen ground.
Hmm.
It's just not, it's not part of the regular hydrologic modeling process or part of our state requirements for for designing practices.
Well,
Uh,
hopefully it's something that, again, practitioners in the field are thinking about, because at least in the literature where you read about the droughts and the floods, they do at least indicate that that might lead to more runoff,
yeah. Yep.
kind of sequences of droughts and floods, which would impact everything we're talking about here today. So
hmm
very interesting to me, Tim, and thank you. I think you might have to give control of the presentation back to Amy. In the time that we have in between presentations, I did want to mention that we will be sending out an email for everybody who's in attendance here today with some survey questions regarding the society, future directions, and things that you guys are interested in, so that we can reflect that in our future work. And also a link if anybody would like to make a donation to the society. I think that's also possible. And technically, it'll be going to OCCA, but then transferred to us. But to get back to the topic, I want to thank you, Tim. That was really great presentation, and I was staring hard at those graphs, and made me think of a lot of things as we go forward. And hopefully, there are folks in the audience who are considering the career path and see that sort of work that might be different than what you find in an urban setting, and really consider engineering in the rural setting and an agricultural setting. So
hmm
thank you so much.
Yep.
All right. Hope everybody's comfortable out there as we move into our last presentation. Introduce Pete for just a moment here before he launches into his discussion. As I mentioned during the business meeting, I think Pete's responsible for my introduction to the society. I thank you for that, Pete, and thank you for coming back here today and doing one more service for the society. It's really, I do appreciate that. Pete was the state engineer for NRCS for a number of years. I think that's when I initially got to know Pete, and got to actually, I think, go out on some field trips, Pete, thinking back to a long time ago, where topics of, uh, you know, extreme hydrology relative to the CAFO permit, but relative to all farms, I guess, was the topic that you were talking about as we walked around the farm, looking at gutters and looking at rockline waterways and all the places that water would run. So very interesting. I'm so happy to have you here today. I want to get right into your talk, and I really do value your perspective on what you see as the status of the engineering, I guess, industry in agricultural conservation. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Pete Wright, everybody, and thanks again, Pete.
Well, and thank you, Scott, for thinking of me for this presentation. Thanks, Tim, for setting up all the precipitation issue, and Chris for those practices. Um, I, I'm going to see if you can see this. You all see, hopefully you're seeing the screen.
Yep.
Just checking. Okay. And you see, I've focused on dairy farms, and I apologize for that. My career, though, has been kind of around farms. And in New York State, that's the predominance of the farming. But much of what I say and can be applied to other farms as well. I want to go through my career just a little bit. What a surprise. I was raised on a dairy farm in the hills of Homer, Chris. But our farm drains down to the Susquehanna. It doesn't go into Skaneateles, so lucky thing. However, after working as a hired man, I decided maybe a college was in my... So I applied to Cornell University. What a surprise. The only I wanted to go to the ag school, and in the ag school there was only one program that did not require an essay, and that was agricultural engineering. So that's what I did. I stayed for one extra year and got a Master of Engineering, and I think that was a good move on my part for my future career. Then I went to at the time it was the Soil Conservation Service, a couple years down in Virginia, getting some experience. It was a little different. There were a lot of beef operations down there, and a lot of heavy clay soil, which made designing manure storages very easy. You just basically you dig a hole. There it was. But then I moved back to New York and Batavia, became a project engineer, built dams and channels. The channels were water control, really drainage. And then the dams were flood control. Then it got to be the area engineer in what used to be Area 1 over in Western New York. And that's where I got a lot of my experience in manure management. I would say that being the area engineer, that was my favorite job. It was a really wonderful opportunity to meet and work with NRCS people and district people and landowners that were putting conservation on the land. I thought it really was good. Got recruited to be part of the pro dairy team dealing with manure. This was when the department was with the Department of Agriculture and Biological Engineering, where I was based. Since then, they've also changed their name to Biological and Environmental Engineering. Worked there for 10 years, and then the opportunity to become the state conservation engineer up in Syracuse came about. So I went there. That was an interesting transition because as the area engineer, you saw, I would say mostly it was 50% wonderful projects and 50% of projects that had an issue. When you become the state conservation engineer, it switches. So you end up with, I would say, 10% of the projects, they're wonderful showpieces, and 90% of the projects you're exposed to, or there's an issue. Retired from there, and then went back to work with ProDairy part-time. At that time, it turned out to be with the Department of Animal Science, and that's again, dealing with the dairy farms. And finally, in January, I retired, and I can recommend that to you all. I think if you meet people that are retired, generally they're smiling, they're happy, things are good. And I think it's important for you all to think it rushes at you fast. So think about that. It is in your future. And I think it's a good thing. Okay, why do we care? We care of agriculture. Agriculture is vitally important because we got to feed the people. And it's important to know that we got to feed the people as we get more and more people. We got the same amount of land. We got to do it, and we got to do it sustainably. And I think that's our challenge, right? Is to move our agriculture system towards sustainability. And that's going to take a lot of engineering. I looked up, what is agricultural engineers? This is where Google sent me. It all sounds good, right? Bachelor's degree, all good. Job outlook, faster than average. I think that's clear. Agriculture engineers solve problems concerning power supplies, machine efficiency, use of structures and facilities, pollution and environmental issues, and storage and processing of agricultural products. So there's this broad spectrum of what agricultural engineers can do. And I think as you get involved in it, that you have to experience that whole spectrum. It includes functions, as you know, of civil engineering. All that hydrology could be right in civil engineering. Mechanical engineering, got to know how structures work. valves, pipes, pumping, that kind of thing. Environmental engineering, we talked about sustainability, and that's all the processes that are involved in protecting the environment as we're dealing with agriculture, which includes erosion control, right? Water management, those kind of things. It does bring in biological engineering, though, and I think this is the unique aspect of it. We have to know about animals. We have to know about animal behavior. If you're designing a barn or a farm system, you got to know how they might move. It definitely deals with plants as you're thinking about, what is the conservation mix? What are we going to use to control erosion? What is the cropping system that this farm's going to use to deal with it? And now it even involves bacteria. And this was kind of the one problem I had with my whole career is I didn't think about these, and I encouraged everybody, all the farms, to put in storage, forgetting that there would be bacterial action within that storage. Global warming is real, and manure systems are part of the problem. The manure stored, the bacteria produce methane. Methane is one of the critical global warming elements. Also, where the nutrients go there too, it's also this brings in food waste, though. And remember, we're doing all this to grow food, and food waste is a huge issue. Both for global warming, both for the efficiency of sustainability, but it also comes into our co-digestion and the ability that agriculture has to deal directly with global warming, really in a big way. So we talk about that too. And of course, where can we deal with this? And you see the U.S. Does have quite an opportunity to make a change in the progress of global warming. We hit on this already, and so certainly thank Chris and especially Tim for talking about it. There's no question we're getting more and more extreme. The amount and peak runoff is increasing. We're going to have more and more of a problem. Engineers got to figure it out, got to be able to deal with it. And that, of course, is part of the issues that have already been brought up. One kind of an ethical issue that this comes in is, okay, we know what the 50-year storm is now. And so if we're designing a 50-year practice, wait a minute, what will the 50-year storm be 50 years from now? And should we design for that? So that's the world is changing, and we have to figure out how to keep doing it. So with climate change, here's the issues. We have more and more extreme events, so we need more and more runoff control. We got to deal with those extreme events with either runoff control or even, let's get out of the way of the water. So maybe we had one of the professors said, the problem is not flood control dams. The problem is our cities, our houses, and everything are in the wrong place. We put them where they were close to water. Maybe we should move them out of there. I'd tell that to everybody on the ocean, right? Don't live on the ocean. The issue, though, with precipitation is in the Northeast, particularly, we're going to get more and more of it. It will maybe come in a fast amount, but we're going to get more and more of it. So drainage will also be a big issue. I think there's going to be much more emphasis on drainage. And Chris, as you design those wasp cobs and you ran the tiles down, I'm hoping you're providing enough capacity for drainage to those fields that can move into that same tile line. That would be a good thing. Now, the other problem, though, is not only are we going to get more rainfall, it's going to come at different times, and we are definitely going to end up with more droughts. It's going to be hotter, and there will be longer drought periods. So this is going to mean that we got to deal with irrigation. And I think there's a huge opportunity to utilize irrigation to maximize the yields on the land that we are farming, so we don't need more land, and to increase the yields and the quality of the crops. So I think irrigation is a huge issue coming forward. And of course, it will get hotter, and animals definitely deal with heat stress. We got to deal with the heat stress. And then also the heat will actually change the cropping patterns and the impact of certain pests that then we got to make sure that we can deal with that. Change. We're going to actually, we are experiencing and have experienced, and we're going to continue to experience the actual change in farming practices. This is a fairly modern farm. Here's the fairly modern inside of a farm, but you can see that they didn't include the ventilation that might be needed in the modern structure. And of course, they're getting bigger and bigger. We see ventilation, we see the airflow, we see the cows, we think about cow comfort, we think about efficiency, we think about, again, what is the most sustainable operation out there? Here's another change. You can see how we used to handle manure back in the old days. Maybe not the best, but there it is. And hopefully when they build a new barn, they're going to come up with perhaps a better way of dealing with the manure. Here we built the new barn. We surrounded, pushing it all into a storage. I think storing the manure is a vital water quality practice. We want to put the nutrients out at the time when they could be most optimally used and not lost to the environment. And that involves storing. Of course, a lot of different ways we can look at this. Who wouldn't want this on their farm? This is a wonderful storage. Of course, maybe until it comes time to empty it, but different materials for storage. We have the concrete, we have earthen storage, and more and more. I'd like to say the easiest ones have been done already. Farms that have the clay, have the location for earthen storages. A lot of them have been built, and now we end up with a more engineering solution to it, to put in liners, and you can see that's quite a operation to put those liners in, which would be designed. And of course, our whole goal in life is to not have this occur. We put fresh manure on snow and melting snow or on ice, and we're going to end up with runoff. You can see that it's going to get in the road ditch. What a surprise. The road ditches flow right down to our lakes, and the plume of manure flowing out into the lakes really causes a lot of problems. So storage is in our, we're certainly implementing that and doing it. I think over the long term, though, we're going to end up with more of this, and that is actually covering the storages. Has some huge advantages. We're collecting the rainfall water, which should be fairly clean, and we can pump that off, and then that's water that the farm doesn't have to deal with. We also, though, the gases that are collected under this, we can utilize and flare them so that it's not methane loosed into the atmosphere, but just carbon dioxide, which is a lower global warming impact. I might add that carbon dioxide that we would be emitting after a flare actually equals the carbon dioxide that the plants took up to produce energy for the animals, and so it's a net zero if you flare it all. If you turn it into methane, though, you actually are increasing things. And then, of course, you want to come up with mechanisms to spread the manure uniformly. So we use it as fertilizer. I think one of the failings is that we've not got the manure spreading industry to produce a uniformity index on their equipment. They tell you how long they last. They tell you their capacity. They tell you how easy it is. But none of them ever come up and say, oh, yeah, and by the way, here's our uniformity of spread that we get. And of course, you can do it in multiple ways. I think one of the huge changes that has occurred to help with manure management is the drag hose systems. You do get pretty good uniformity as long as you don't get plugging here. And you can apply it efficiently and effectively and quickly, which is really what you want to do. You have a manure storage, you got to move that manure quickly and efficiently out into the field. And the drag hose system is a wonderful way to do it. Comes with a lot of mechanical mechanisms, one of which is the idea that you can actually measure in real time the nutrient content or estimated nutrient content as you're putting it out. You can coordinate that with your nutrient management field. You want different amounts of nutrients. And really, that would be a pretty effective way to apply the right amount of nutrients at the right time, the right rate out on the landscape. So I think technology is helping us move this forward. Manure is not water. I think water would be the Newtonian thing here, where the shear stress and the gives you a uniform shear velocity. Manure is much more resistant to movement with a low, but then once you stir it up, you actually can get it moving quite fast. And I think this is an issue in all our manure management or manure treatment systems, and that is how to deal with that. Storage it does help us there because without a roof or a cover, you end up with wetter manure. You get it down to 4% solids, and it will pretty much act like water. But when it's thicker than that, you have trouble dealing with it. Got to deal with pumps. And of course, we're all familiar with this equation, right? The total head, you need to know what's the elevation we're lifting, and then deal with the pressure in the line. The good thing about drag hoses, you need very little pressure at the end, so that's also a good thing. And then, of course, the friction loss in our lines. And the farms have been putting piping systems in, and I think that's a whole nother engineering aspect of how to deal with those pipes and how long they'll last and what size they should be. First, people were putting them in, let's not spend a lot of money, and more we're realizing because of this friction factor here that we'd be better off with larger size pipes. Want to put a plug in for NRCS. Also, I thought Tim might have mentioned more, but he didn't, that the state has a lot of funding. So this kind of mimics this. NRCS has all kinds of funding, different programs, which provide funds for farms to put in conservation practices. And I guess you all know that. What they need, though, is people to do the engineering for these practices. And so they've set up a technical service provider website, and you can go into this and become a technical service provider. So you actually get a payment from NRCS as an engineer in order to implement these. My experience has been is that these rates were set as if it was a perfect project, that the planning was completed, that here's the design, and your trips out to the field would be minimal, everything goes right. You do the plan and the layout and design gather, then you lay it out, and then you might check it a couple different times and finally complete the as-builts. The real way to make this work for a private engineer is to end up with, on the same farm, multiple practices, so that your travel costs are spread over multiple practices. And of course, the NRCS goes through this until you get to this point, and this is when the engineer might come in. However, if anything happened in here, you get to the farm and you want to put in a practice, and I don't know, is that the one? Then you end up with all kinds of trouble. So I think it's important to hope and rely on NRCS to do this appropriately. And of course, here's the NRCS planning process and the engineers over here and implementing it, doing the as-builts, and hopefully all this part was done ahead of time. There's a lot of issues with how much of it is funded, and where the farmer is with the other portion, and that kind of thing. I think the other issue is, by the way, you need to follow the standards as you design it, and then your specifications have to make sure that the standards are followed and that the practice gets put in right. And that takes a lot of judgment. The standards are written for a engineer that knows what they're doing and knows what to apply. We have some people that try to manipulate their way around the standards. You need to know what you're doing. The specifications are what the engineer puts on to make sure that it does work. And I think all those are important documents, and it's important that the practices are put in place so they actually will work. Tim alluded to this, right? There is a actual law that describes what professional engineers do, and we might read that. The practice of the profession of engineering is defined as performing professional services, consultation, investigation, evaluation, planning, design, or supervision of construction or operation in connection with utilities, structures, buildings, machines, equipment, processes, works, or projects wherein the safeguarding of life, health, and property, wherein the safeguarding of life, health, and property is concerned, when such work or service requires the application of engineering principles and data. Engineering principles are math and science. And I would defy anybody to say anything, what doesn't that cover? And of course, it was written by engineers, and it really covers a lot. The real thing comes into safeguarding the life and health and property. The safety of the public is one of the big defining things. And so that's where we got into helping the New York State Board of Engineers define what was a conservation practice versus what was an engineering practice. So the engineering practices would be those that impact the health and safety of the public. The conservation practices are those that really move agriculture forward. While we're talking about safety, I think it's important to bring that up. We often deal with confined space. A lot of gases can create issues, and so in our designs, we got to really think about the safety. One, don't have confined spaces if possible. Two, what safety features are needed if there are confined space. I told you we were dealing with methane now, and so flames and explosion come into place. Drowning is always an issue, right? And anytime we have water, especially remember those plastic lined slopes. If anybody's been on them when they're wet, you know that they're slippery. And so that's very dangerous. And of course, electricity has its own issues. So we end up with fences and signs, standard operating procedures, and then also emergency action plans are things that come into the what an engineer might need to deal with. So we were involved then in the comprehensive nutrient management plans and where does engineering fit into those? And they pretty much manure storages, engineering practice, manure transfer outside of the barn is an engineering practice. Dealing with barnyards, silage, leachate, and milking center waste. These are potential contaminants, potential pollutant points on the farm that definitely would impact the health and safety of the public if they get turned loose in the world. So as we looked with the Board of Engineers in New York State, we came up with this list of what might be practices that could involve the health and safety of the public. And you certainly can look at, well, at least some of these and say, no, not in this case. But in many cases, they actually would involve the health and safety of the public, and therefore they turn into engineering practices. So the CAFO permit says, yeah, you will. Any newly installed engineering practice will be designed and constructed under the supervision of an engineer, and that you'll have the documentation. And so this is why we need engineers working with partners in the field to implement these agricultural practices. They came about, of course, waste storage. We had some catastrophic manure spills. So there you have it. Manure transfer. We had pumping and pipeline failures, so this brought the attention of DEC onto these practices, especially that we need to deal with. So again, all new ones need a professional engineer. They have an arrangement with NRCS that if you're working through NRCS with proper job approval authority, that works as well. An issue with all of these, though, is it's not only build it, but they got to be operated and maintained appropriately. And I think that is some place that we all fall down. We like to, oh, we built it, check, and then move on. When really it's how they're operated and maintained that really makes quite a difference. There are manure storages that people can go out right now and build a manure storage, and if you're not a CAFO farm, not falling under the comprehensive nutrient management plan, you just can build it in most places. Well, then when the farm becomes a CAFO, now you got to go out and evaluate it, and there's a whole process where you might go through to use professional engineering judgment to evaluate that practice. Here's one of my favorite issues is the leachate that comes from stored silage. It's interesting that we're getting less of this because farms are paying much more attention to their harvesting. And if they harvest at the right moisture content, they get much less leachate. But there still is certainly the possibility of leachate, not only if you harvest it wet, but also as there's rainfall conditions or improper storage that result in this highly nutrient-rich contaminant that could leave the site. So we come up with practices to contain it, catch it, and take it out, and then hopefully treat it in a vegetative treatment area. So they've gone through a lot of different, we've tried concrete, we've tried pipes, This is a gravel mound, and so far I think this is the best that we have. You can see that over time it will get contaminated and plug. When that happens, one, you can go in and rake it off. Two, you can pick up the whole pieces and go spread it. That's certainly a possibility as well. If you have concrete, it's got to be absolutely level. It never is. If you have pipes, they have holes and they plug. It gives you uneven distribution as it goes out into the field. So a gravel mound might be one of the best ways. So if these rocks here end up with getting all contaminated, what are you going to do? You know, you can't go in and wash each one of those, and you can't pick them all up and put them someplace because they're too big. But end up with a very nice vegetative treatment area that is we can take the highly nutrient water. We are collecting the low flow, taking the low flow to a storage, the low flow that has the highest concentration, and then the high flow when it rains and it's less concentrated, we're treating out in a vegetative treatment area. And so far, to my knowledge, New York is the only state where we're allowed to do this, where then what leaves the vegetative treatment area is considered agricultural runoff and not where you got to catch it again and store it or spread it or something like that. And I think it was a stroke of genius. This relies on one, designing them properly, spreading it evenly, but also the idea that we catch the low flow, so we're controlling the nutrients on it, and we're harvesting the vegetative matter, so it's like a crop field. And we're also soil testing for high phosphorus. If we end up with high phosphorus down in this lower edge, then we got to do some remedial action. So with those three things, we can call this an ag field, and therefore it's under the ag runoff exemption. A lot of engineering going in to design them, and a lot of O&M into making sure that they work. Number of people have, let's just store it. And that's simple to start with, but in the long run, if you store it, you've got to deal with that runoff every time, every year. And that can be quite a high cost and quite a high problem for the farm. Because it's water and they got drag hose systems and pipes and pumps, maybe not so hard, but still every year there's a lot of water that you got to deal with coming off of those. Another issue that has to be looked at is what's the life of these practices, and particularly the two that potentially cause the most trouble. What's the life of a manure storage, and what's the life of a manure transfer system? And as they exceed the design life, what are you going to do? So, how you're going to deal with them, and you know that everything varies. And once again, the O&M on them is critical. Have you kept everything up? Have you maintained it? Have you continually kept things right? And then, of course, how it was used. I'm thinking of the manure transfer, the pipes. Did we have excessive pressure on them? Did they plug? Things like this. Does depend, right, on the material. Different materials have different life. The metal structures, we have an issue with. Here's a metal structure that actually had an issue with the valves, and kind of a catastrophic problem. Luckily, this was in the New York City watershed, and they were able to come up with a diversion, catch this before it got anywhere loose. But it certainly is a scary thing to think that this whole thing is emptying and coming at you. In manure transfers, of course, we always have problems. This is the approximate location of the pipe. And what a surprise, right here where it bends. right where it changes from flat to going steeper. We ended up with a problem. Was it the material or was it the plugging that occurs in the line? But that's why it's important to monitor your systems and perhaps maybe not build them like this. Might have been better to make it more uniform or a wider turn. So figuring out what the extended life issues are. Again, it's O&M. What we can do? Should we monitor it more often? Should we reevaluate it? Who will be the qualified professional to reevaluate it? Can a planner do it? Can DEC do it? Or do you need a professional engineer? How are you going to upgrade it? Are you going to decommission and replace it? And who's going to pay? How much is that going to cost? And who's ultimately has the liability? And I would say in general, it is actually going to be the owner. We talked about surface flows, but there's also groundwater issues, and the water withdrawal permit requires a professional engineer to help the farms deal with that. If they an average of 100,000 gallons in a month, and that does occur now with our larger farms. So it's something that farms have to deal with. And you go through the thing and you end up with the permit is needed. You need a PE to help you with that. Well, let's talk about manure treatment. All kinds of options for manure handling and treatment. Sky's the limit. Every farm is different. And there's all kinds of options and methods to go almost as far as you want to. There are systems on farms that actually do produce clean water at the end. Some of them, the water was even so clean that the environmental agency said, no, you can't put that clean water in. You got to add some salts to it. You got to make it so it matches the natural system, so you're not hurting the animals. Or you can just quit, just store it and then put it out right as stored manure. And so you got to have a reason to go through all this, but those reasons can involve your effort to move towards sustainability. So there's more and more issues on how to end up with different manure products through manure treatment. You should learn about nutrient. And it's they have a website where they look at different manure management technologies and look at how they might work and help, they say, support farmers' social license to operate and builds public trust. This is moving towards sustainability. And the nutrient site, if you go to it, it has different scoring on different practices. So too often a farm is sold something, oh, we think this works, and then they find out that wait a minute, it might have worked once, but it doesn't going to work where you are, or it doesn't actually work. And so they score each of those practices so the farmers can help make decisions. So it's a very useful place to look at different technologies. There's the website, and you can get into it and see what different kinds of practices they might have. Solid separation is a big one. And I think solid separation has a wonderful opportunity, not only for manure handling, but also sustainability. The solid manure portion does not release as much methane as the liquid. And the separated liquid, once the solids are out of it, or a lot of the solids, doesn't produce as much methane either. So you end up having products that are easy to handle, maybe products that are useful. So you can use some of those solids for bedding on some farms. And then at the same time, you're reducing your impact, your global methane emission impact. So that's handling manure solids. We also use sand for bedding. And here's where the engineering comes in. You're looking for a sand that's not too coarse because you got the cow's hoofs to deal with. You want a sand that's not too fine though, or you end up with a poor recovery of it. So you're going to be constantly bringing sand into the system. And so you're looking for a material that you probably can recycle to both save you money and still provide a good bedding. So how do you design that? Again, it's a hydrologic aspect, right, of settling and velocities, and in order to come out with a good layout of something that will recover as much sand as possible. How do you do it? We also, though, can come up with a anaerobic digestion to fully recover or try to recover as much renewable natural gas as we can. This is the same methane that, if it escapes, becomes a global warming issue. But if we actually catch it, it can be another profit on the farm potentially. And so we have upright tanks. We also have plug flow systems. These are more underground tanks. Different systems that we can put in place to actually encourage anaerobic digestion, to get rid of all the volatile solids from the manure system and collect the methane that they produce, to then help us to move towards sustainability. We did talk about the gases that are produced, and the methane is a good one. Hydrogen sulfide is a very dangerous one. This comes into our safety issues, and I don't want to say constantly, we too often, any is too often, we end up with people that actually die from this. Got to think about it all the time. We also have another issue with ammonia. The nitrogen in ammonia, if it's lost as a gas, as it can settle down, then becomes a pollutant if it settles in the wrong place. And so controlling the ammonia release is also an issue that is coming into play. We talked about that the methane, of course, is flammable. It is explosive. And there's actually a region where there's enough oxygen and enough methane that it actually could explode. So don't let that happen. Of course, if you keep the oxygen out, you can't breathe it. So you'll die from that, but at least it won't explode. But it's good to know where you are on this chart. Talked about food waste. And certainly as we go into long-term storage, this is the potential methane emissions per cow per year. And you can see with long-term storage, we get a lot. Daily spreading, we didn't get much, right? Because you spread it daily. There's not time for the anaerobic bacteria to thrive. They would be aerobic, and so would be converting it to carbon dioxide and not methane. However, if you're doing this, you got water quality issues. So dealing with the water quality issues, we go to the storage. When there's storage, you have the potential methane release. If you separate out the solids, you end up with less, right? Because the solids don't produce as much, and then the liquids produce less because there's not as much volatile solids in it. If you go to anaerobic digestion, you actually can go negative. Now you're actually catching that methane and replacing natural gas in the system by using renewable natural gas. But the huge advantage comes in when you also import food waste and collect all the methane that would have been released from the food waste as it went to a landfill. And so a huge potential here for farms to really participate in global warming control by reutilizing food waste, not only for their nutrient value, but also for their energy value. It's always interesting to me how much more energy there is in food waste than in manure. And when you think about it, we take a fairly non-digestible product and we feed it to the cows, and the cows are able to utilize it with their 4 stomachs. And then we have the manure, and we're getting energy from, this process that's already used to extract the energy. Whereas food waste, it's food, and there's a lot of energy in it. So there's a lot of energy in food waste. Got a program that's encouraging people to deal with the food waste, and they're going to continue doing this. That you're supposed to be, if you're producing a lot, you should be recycling it. And my understanding, they're going to try to crank this down in New York State, so there'll be more and more chances for food waste to be utilized on farms. The issue comes in is as you're bringing the food waste in, you're also going to be bringing in extra volume and extra nutrients. So the farm has to deal with the management of the volume and the nutrient excess as they deal with it. They may get tipping fees for bringing the food in. They may end up with carbon credits, and certainly if the nutrients can be recycled and used on the farm, that's a benefit as well. When you think about, okay, we're bringing this in, the other thing you got to ask is, bring in the food waste, how much of the solids will be turned to liquid, and therefore are you going to increase the liquid volume that you're going to deal with? And we had these people that work through what would happen, how to size the different, how to anticipate how much additional volume you need. As the food waste is converted to methane, the byproduct of that, of course, is carbon dioxide, which also goes up in the atmosphere, but you're left with a liquid product. So how are you going to design the system after that? And what happens to the nutrients after that? And trying to figure out the economics of it. Oh, yeah, bring in the food waste, you get paid a certain amount per gallon, but wait a minute, now you got to deal with the gallons that are left. So what is that? So we can go through the math to figure that out, and mass in equals the mass out versus going up in the atmosphere or caught in gas, but also the mass out in the liquid. Seems pretty simple, but many ways to figure out how you might mathematically figure out in chemical analysis to what you're going to get. And of course, you're estimating this amount, and what will be water, and what will be in there, and then different food mixtures will give you different gas production, and then therefore different nutrients and different volumes to deal with. So go through some math to figure all that out, and with different mixes, and then based on this, you can try to get the food waste you have and try to fill in what's it look closest to. Does it look closer to cabbage or potatoes? And you can go through and come up with the volume reduction that you might get through the different mixes, so that you know, again, how much to be prepared to store and deal with. And it all comes in, how you're going to estimate the biogas production, which also is a useful thing, because if you think you're paying for the system by selling renewable natural gas, you want to know what your biogas production is. So again, you can go through that process of math to come up with the amount that you think you might get. There's also the issue of odor. This also brought out by storing the manure. As you store the manure, of course, it smells worse. And so how do you deal with that odor? And we had engineers in Minnesota come up with a setback estimation tool where you come up with the size of the dairy farm. You say whether it's treated, and you have different values that then you can put in that will help tell you what kind of odor you can expect at a distance. And we haven't implemented that in New York State, but you can imagine people might be interested in something like that, which is additional engineering aspect. So some conclusions. One, if you're going to be a ag engineer, you need to have some ethics. The ASABE, American Society of Agriculture and Biological Engineers, has some an ethical statement for you to look at. If you want to get more involved, the National Society of Professional Engineers has a more also ethical issues that you got to deal with. You got to think about your liability. There's insurance for that. People underestimate this, and this is an issue for somebody that wants to get into ag engineering. Is if you get into it a little bit, your insurance may go up. So you've got to get into it a big way so that you can spread the cost of that insurance over many projects. I put payment here. Farms are operating on a narrow margin. If you work with a farm that's on too narrow of a margin, they can't pay you. So that becomes an issue that you've done all this work and you're not going to get paid. So think about that. I think to get into the engineering market, if you're like a civil engineer, you need exposure. How do you let farmers know that you're willing and able and have the ability to do that? And I think the best way to do that is to actually work with partners. Specifically, the either NRCS or soil and water conservation districts. They work with the farms, and if you can work with them, one, it can help you reduce your costs, right? Use the district people as your eyes and ears. I think that's a very useful thing. The other is networking, and I would suggest the American Society of Ag and Biological Engineers. There's your society. And as we're also the Soil and Water Conservation Society, and I belong to both and think they're both excellent tools to help increase your knowledge, keep you up to date in this area. And with that, I think I'm willing to take some questions if there are any.
Yeah, this is Tim Clark again. What do you think about making the industry more lucrative for potential entrants and new graduates? I like how you said, if you're going to join the TSP game, try and get a bunch of practices all at once on the same location or local to each other, to reduce travel costs. But like, do you have any other insight on, just making it more lucrative, more attractive to people?
Well, one, I'd encourage NRCS to recognize that not every practice runs smoothly. So their TSP rates are based on everything's working good, and everything doesn't work good. So you've got to go to the site again. You may have to redesign because of changes that the farmer does. There's those kinds of issues. Certainly, I can understand NRCS's point of view, though. You don't want to make it you don't want to make it a money-making thing for the farmer. So how do you put that together? I'm not sure. Tim, I'm not sure I have other ideas of how the agricultural engineer can make more money.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, the NRCS insight's good.
There's another question for you in the chat, kind of along the same lines. I think perhaps salary is part of it, but Jason Oliver asks, Pete, how do we build the pipelines needed to get young people interested in and trained for career opportunities in ag engineering? And then emphasized, What do we all need to be doing to facilitate this, in your opinion?
Yeah, and I think again, I'm going to blame NRCS. NRCS with a yearly budget process that is often stymied. Right now that you got this continuing resolution, we had that issue. They never, very seldom they come up with a program. Oh, look, we're going to need 5 engineers, or we're going to need 2 every year, and therefore we should have internships and training opportunities and working with universities to come up with a program. They work by jerks and starts, and so it's hard to think of that. Now, districts have picked up the ball, right? And there's a number of engineers now hired by the districts, and I think that's an excellent point. Private engineers. So I think again, districts might somehow organize and get together and say, on average, we think we're going to need X amount of engineers per year, and then go to a university to develop a program like that. I don't want to remember when I went to Cornell, it was agricultural engineering. That was the Department of Agricultural Engineering. Now you got to wonder what department you'd end up with at Cornell to get an ag engineering degree. Biological and environmental engineering. I think we had a number of excellent engineers come out of Penn State. I think having a pipeline to Penn State might be a useful thing. I guess I got into enough trouble. I'll just quit there.
Thanks, Pete. I encourage anybody to come off mute and ask any questions that you might have.
I don't necessarily have a question, but I certainly have input.
Yeah. Hi,
This
Cody.
is Cody Sargent, professional engineer with NRCS. And so I just wanted to say that New York, we had it going good. We really did. We do have internship programs that we are trying to work with colleges on, but I will say that as a young professional in engineering, it is very challenging and it's very difficult because we don't always think of agricultural engineering as where we need to be. Right now, we have it where the mindset that everyone has is ag is a losing business. We're losing farmland left and right. We're continuing to see agriculture shift and change and morph. Even within NRCS, we're seeing the clients that we get coming from, massive, large dairies down to, I got 6 sheep. And so I think that it is important that we start trying to change that narrative also on a lot of fronts. The ag is still alive in New York State. We do still have a lot of agriculture in New York State. It may not be the face that we always thought of. It may not be the face of these 150 through 100, 600 head cattle farms, but we still have orchards. We still have a lot of different booming industries. Part of me is coming from this also because I am a producer. I'm not just an engineer. I'm also a farmer. So I think that if we can keep working with 4-H, and I know I'm very active in my local 4-H, I think the more we can get out there and be involved and get boots on the ground and show how cool it is that we do, I think we're all going to see succession. That's just my 2 cents on it all.
And I think you're right. And I think as we look in the future of agriculture, it'll be certainly more and more interesting, more and more technical. A lot of new systems coming into play. I talked about manure treatment, but there's also all kinds of, I would say, robotic systems that are being implemented on farms, and there will be more in the future. So there really is a lot that can be done. I think with the consolidation, though, there they're going to need more and more technical services, but it'll be harder and harder to get into it.
I just want to throw in my 2 cents. I took my PE in 2024, and I did the ag and bioengineering. Went to school for civil up at Clarkson. I remember vividly in my water resources class, I was like, hey, my family does tile, and the professor was like bathroom tile, and I'm like, no, farm tile, and he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about, and it was a chapter in the book. And it really, so what I've kind of found was I'm like, all right, I'm going to take this ag and bio PE. It must be like resources out there. It should be great because, civil water resources, there's all these great programs, like all these study guides, all this books, you can find it. Ag and bio, there were like maybe 10 presentations on YouTube, and that was it. So we had a group of 15 people. We got a Discord together, kind of shared some information, did maybe the couple practice problems that were out there, and we did really well. I just looked at the pass rates just from 2024. So 31 people across the country took the ag and bioengineering PE versus the civil water resources was 2,300. So even amongst like the training aspect of understanding like what is from that perspective, I go to ASAB and I'm like, guys, what are we doing? Like you're losing even the narrative of who we are as engineers, as ag engineers. So to me, there's a broader identity crisis of what is an ag engineer. If we're going to go the civil route, that's great. If you're going to go the mechanical route, but to your point to the presentation today, we're dealing with mechanical, we're dealing with soil and water. It's so broad, biological, and all of this, we're so broad and so specialized in so many things. It's kind of a unique who we are as an entity, as ag engineers. So.
Now, Chad, did you take advantage at one time? ASABE was subsidizing students to take the test as a ag engineer.
Yeah, it's like a couple $100. It wasn't,
Yeah.
but I went through the review courses and things like that, and that really was my feedback. I went up to the conference in Toronto and I'm like, hey, coming in, I have my civil friends. The majority of my friends have taken the civil exam because there's so many resources out there. So what do we do different so we can update this stuff from 2014? That's not even relevant to today's exam. You're like, oh, we're working on it. But we'd really love to see some engineers and some professors, produce some new content. So really it was kind of put back on us as the industry to say, if you want to see things get better, the industry has to step up and make things better. No one else is really going to do the work, sadly.
Chat, I think that's a really great point. Back when we had agreements with SUNY. We had agreements with SUNY Cobleskill, SUNY ESF. We had things going on with Cornell. And a lot of those got canceled recently. And a lot of our interns were let go recently, very quickly. And what I found when I could recruit and talk to people, you go to, I went to I don't know if anybody else goes to this. It's a really great opportunity over in White Plains in the spring. It's the Tri-State Engineering Expo. So many bright students and their families and teachers. And you talk about what the engineering is that we do. I'm going to say it's not sexy. It's not the high paying engineering field. I mean, we are the farmers of engineers, right? So, it's a lot of work for probably not the pay we thought we wanted as an engineer. But we do this for the farmers. So when I talk to individuals at the outreach, they uh, high school students, college graduates, other professionals don't know about this sector of work that we do, what conservation engineering is, what farmers need from engineers, or even municipalities, what they need from engineers that is environmental, agriculture related. And if we aren't telling our story, then folks don't know. And I applaud you for bringing it to the classroom and saying, hey, there's a spot for that. I had a very similar experience in my college days, but I'm also an ESF alum, and at the time, Don Lake was teaching. So we had a really close relationship with understanding where we could go from there. So I don't I know that these fits and starts, you got it nail on the head, Peter. It's hard to do. Um, and we have we have a recovery ahead of us. That's going to be a very steep climb.
And I do want to piggyback on that also, Chad, is I'm also a Clarkson alum and I took my PE back in March. Um, I'll admit it, I went for water resources. I absolutely went for water resources because there was so much more available to me. And quite frankly, when I was trying to find a group of people to study with, it was like, hey, what are y'all doing? And when all of my colleagues were like, oh yeah, we're doing water resources, it's like, well, I guess I'm following suit. And that's really what I ended up fighting. I mean, right out of Clarkson, I went to work for Ducks Unlimited. And I remember at Ducks Unlimited, one of the biggest things that they said was, we need an agricultural engineer, but we can't find agricultural engineers. But so we're hiring civil engineers because we need civil engineers who understand structural, and environmental engineers don't. So we got civil engineers who understand the structures for the water control, but we need an ag engineer because ag engineers do it all. So it's hard to be the jack of all trades, master of none.
And not to, this is a whole nother conversation, a rabbit hole, but where we're seeing one of the biggest challenges is civil engineers right now trying to understand subsurface drainage and water stuff with renewable energy and solar siting. So
Yeah,
and there's such a disconnect of civil versus, they are different, and it is like, but I don't think we've defined ourselves well as ag engineers to be like, this is really what it's all about, because it is so, it is so broad to how oxygen levels in a pig barn to, like all of that stuff. I knew nothing about HVAC until I had to study for the PE. But here we are.
I got lucky. I thought I was going to go the mechanical route. I did a bunch of work doing HVAC and plumbing and then switched over to civil. And so I just kind of fell into this literally. Um, and so I am all for if anybody wants to come up with ideas, questions, and concerns. I mean, I also tell you I talked to 4-H Cornell here in my building yesterday. And we're already starting to talk about trying to get kids in a lot of our 4-H groups to start learning GIS, to start learning about programming, to start learning about all of these things that are setting the stage for not necessarily direct in our industry, but it's like, hey, if kids can learn robotics, we can start getting them to do service work on milk machines. If kids can learn GIS, we can start getting them into surveying. We can start trying to get funnels at least somewhere into that ag related side of life.
This is great stuff. I wish we could have done 3 hours on this conversation, really, and it kind of is putting the idea in my mind as perhaps something that needs to happen beyond this annual meeting, but maybe the society or all of us together in our professional partnerships can have a more lengthy and concerted effort into this exact part of the conversation. I think, Pete, you did a great job laying out a lot of information in your presentation, and I'm certainly going to go back to reviewing this recording. you know, from especially in terms of the complexity in which an engineer could get involved with these bigger farms. It really is amazing the scope that you could become involved with. And then again, reflecting back to Chris's presentation, where it's, you know, not so complex. Not to say that it's easy, but as Tim described, there's a lot there. So there is a lot, and especially this pipeline issue and a lot of other things that you mentioned. I did want to comment though, and then I'll be quiet because I want to encourage others. You know, as NRCS goes through these kind of gyrations with funding, the state funding has really maintained itself. So we do see ourselves as a way of funding engineers for ag projects, and districts certainly know that well. Engineering services usually get 100% cost share in our programs, and so that is still available. I love your idea, Pete. I think it was you who suggested to encourage multi-system projects on a particular application because it makes it more cost effective for the engineer. That's a great idea. One other thing I'd throw out, I think we were just talking about this the other day, is, you know, the amount that districts put in that box for the amount that they ask for is based on the input of the engineer. So if engineers think that we are not lucrative enough, or, you know, they can say, well, I'll do that project for this amount, and then that's what gets put in the grant. So I wanted to mention that was a really great idea. I'll stop there and let others talk, but I really hope that this results in future conversations. So in the last few minutes that we have here, does anybody else want to chip in there?
This is Greg from the State Committee on Ag Markets. Chad and Cody, I really appreciate your comments there. If you've got a professor or two up at Clarkson that we could get in touch with about what districts do and NRCS and you know, how to build connections, networks, you know, do guest lectures like y'all have done, and get into working, applying those skills to districts, be great. Christine Georgakakis from ESF reached out to us recently, and we're starting that with her. And anybody on the phone, if you've got, you know, a professor that would link up well with what we all do, we could start it right here. Just throw the name in the chat. And
the biggest feedback when I've had this conversation is curriculum. They're like, we would love to do that. How do we make it relevant? What's the curriculum? I've reached out to Ohio State, like, hey, do we have any good engineering, that water resources? And they're like, we'd love to put it together, but, you know, we don't really have anything in particular. So if there is something, you know, like if there's a district focused curriculum, like that can be like, that I think is really invaluable at that level for them in educational terms. That's how they want to respond to this stuff. So
I just threw Bill Olson's name in the chat. He was my GIS professor. Chad, I'm assuming he also was your professor.
I don't think. When did you graduate?
I graduated
2010. So sorry, I know this is.
When did I graduate? 2018? I think 2018. Yeah, because that's the year I got married. Okay. So Bill Olson does GIS work up there, and he is getting the kids involved with getting out there surveying. He's getting them tied into Bad Elves. He's getting them tied into Avenza. He's getting them tied into how to use GIS. And coming from the private sector also, when I worked for Labella, if we can get more kids to learn GIS, the better in all stages of engineering, for the love of God, please. The more people we can start getting into there, and I think kids will gravitate towards an agricultural system more than, oh, look, it's a street. That's just kind of my 2 cents.
yeah,
Jason,
and Cody,
did you
that
wanna-
makes me think of an interesting one where, you know, it certainly we need professional engineers, but we also need design-oriented conservation technicians, even if they, you know, don't realize a PE license in their career, and might be a nice application for kids in these programs.
So from the Cornell side, right? I mean, the students I interact with are seeking more ag and practical problems, and are frustrated by, this current focus on like medical and, just core biological. Um, and I keep trying to have these conversations internally. So it might be helpful too, if we can sort of like, what is the employment opportunity? Here are the private engineers that are willing to talk to a department chair and champion these ideas. I'm sure Pete had those conversations when he was here too, and I think more voices might be helpful. Um, in addition to 4-H, there's FFA that's really, growing a lot in the state. They don't really do a lot of ag engineering focused stuff. I mean, there's some of it, but I think there's an opportunity there. I used to teach high school too, so I have some relationships with some of those ag teachers. And I have colleagues around the country that do teach this discipline. A lot of them use some of the NRCS manuals as basically a textbook, right? And they work through the same things that were presented today. So happy to be a part of this and help champion where I can. So
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jason. I sense a work group forming, or collaboration at least, and would encourage people to talk about it within each other, but also talk about it within your own circles, and just try to keep the conversation going. Jason, you said something there, and it made me want to say something, but I completely forgot what it was. As that'll happen. It's late in the meeting. Amy, did you want to say something before we sign off?
I was on the same page you were, Scott. It sounds like we may want to put together a quick coffee talk on this topic as the society to one of those things we can add right to that survey for the Society Improvement Survey. So bringing some positivity and helpfulness. And the other thing was just super logistical. Peter, is it all right if we share your slides in the follow-up email? Or did you want us to? Okay. Yep. So there will be a follow-up email for everyone. Yep. Perfect. And it will include the recording of today's meeting in case folks had to jump in later. There will be slides, and then we will also have a quick feedback survey on the meeting itself, as well as that society improvement survey. As Scott mentioned when we kicked off the meeting, we're trying to grow the society, trying to get more people involved. And if we can look at, ag engineering workforce development is something that we care about and want to work on collectively, then I think that's amazing. And we should get that information out there. And so share your ideas. We have a huge room of very intelligent folks here who have great ideas. And the more that we can get them listed and know what people are interested in, the better we can make this. So thank you all very much. And sorry for any shenanigans for tech early on in the 8 o'clock meeting.
Thank you, Amy, for hosting the meeting and making it go smoothly. I think it's really been a success. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I think at peak we had about 44 folks listening in, and really encouraged by the turnout. And like I said, I just hope there's some momentum. This is our effort to kind of push the ball a little bit on ag engineering, and like I said, hopefully everybody can take it home and do what they can within their professional lives to keep it going. And I think I'll just leave it there. I can go on, but let's continue conversations. If anybody has anything to say before we sign off, now would be the time. Otherwise, I'll say thank you for your morning, everybody. Stay safe, stay warm, and join the society. Thanks a lot.